Hey, you okay? Thought I got you there for a sec. Didn't think the gun would fire. Normally it's just a PNG image. You seem alright though. Looks like the bullet only grazed your ear. Anyway, now that you're awake, we can get back into it. But before that, here's the disclaimer screen. Got it? Good.
My leg!
Now, where were we? Oh, right. Angel Almeida. As said in the previous video, Almeida was the other ground zero within Cadenhead's initial cabal of degenerates. Almeida's first notable run-in with the law was in 2018. He was arrested and later convicted of vehicular burglary in Grand Theft Auto, initially having a juvenile custody warrant for absconding supervision. He was caught and later admitted to the police in his interview that he had stolen 3 vehicles, along with being found in connection with 5 prior vehicular burglaries. It would be a few months later, in February of 2019, where he would be sentenced to 18 months in prison, but only serve 13, being released on March 1st of 2020, and at some point, according to the Wired expose, would move in with some family in Queens, New York. Unfortunately, Almeida would be all but reformed. Instead of burglaries and carjacking, he would primarily participate in Cadenhead's sextortion cult, 764, being one of his core members, indulging in much of the abuse you'd come to expect from within these networks. Almeida initially came to the FBI's attention in late 2021 when various anonymous tips alerted them to his presence, warning them of the potential danger he posed. His court documents stating, Almeida posts pictures of children in bondage wear, threatens to kill, sacrifice, and rape people, has met up with a 16-year-old, of which he was charged, may have targeted other potential victims, and is a very dangerous individual. The tipster would go on to ID a couple of social media profiles operated by Almeida, the first being a Facebook account going by the moniker Sergeant Gray, an Instagram account going by the pseudonym Necropedocell, and a second Instagram account going by Stainlord352. The first would showcase the now fairly infamous pictures taken by Almeida, one of which showcasing the Eine black flag, specifically the Temple of Blood's version. Law enforcement was able to confirm his identity by comparing the pictures he had posted to the photos in his Florida arrest records, but also through his purchase of the balaclava mask seen in one of the showcase photos. Second account, Necropedocell, would showcase more evidence of his illegal firearms possession, along with a disturbing photo of a child bound and gagged, with the caption, "Life's always been shit, still I see the past through rose-colored lenses." The Stain account would showcase many threats of violence the tipster had alerted them to, including showcases of animal abuse, specifically of a cat having been stabbed to death, with the caption, "No limits evil," and a dog being terrorized with an airsoft gun, with the caption, "Bringing this classic back because I'm getting too much followers and I don't want soft cocks orbiting." He would continue to post himself holding up handguns toward the camera, along with posting his admission to owning firearms, fully aware it was illegal for him to do so, and threats of a shootout should law enforcement try to arrest him. They would also find and showcase this picture posted by his Stain account. Wow, what a swell guy. Through these posts, law enforcement were able to obtain a search warrant of Almeida's residence, and subsequently were able to obtain the handgun showcased in the posts, its ammunition, the flag, and a few other occult artifacts, including a custom demonic contract, Temple of Blood patches, some occult literature, and 4 digital devices. According to the Wired expose, digital forensics were able to find hundreds of thousands of files, including tons of CSAM-related materials, along with his communications and evidence of his involvement with Cadenhead 764. He was also found to have groomed and extorted multiple minors, coercing them to create CSAM of themselves, and had forced them to commit sexual acts with him. One highlight showcased in the article was Almeida forcing one girl to cut her neck and allowing him to drink the blood from the wound. He has since been charged with 1 count of a felon in possession of a firearm and ammunition, 1 count of sexual exploitation and attempted sexual exploitation of a child, 1 count of coercion and enticement, and 1 count of possession of CP. Almeida has yet to face trial, but has remained in federal custody pending his trial since late 2021. He will likely face a lifetime of imprisonment. Even with this sentencing looming over his shoulder, he still feels it necessary to act like a psychotic ape in the courtroom, going as far to not only attempt to attack a DOJ employee at his hearing, but also his own defense attorney. Now that Almeida is out of the way, let's get into the elephant in the room, the Order of Nine Angles. The Order is an exceptionally mysterious organization. Should you choose to dive into this topic, you'll be met with our first point of discussion, the thick fog that surrounds them. The fog is by design, not only deployed and used by the Order themselves, but also by those whom have a vested interest in their destruction, spearheaded primarily by the Five Eyes, otherwise known as the Anglosphere Intelligence Alliance, comprising the likes of Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America. This fog serves a few different purposes. The first is to hide or obscure the truth, as showcased by many news articles, and even a fairly large YouTuber, falsely associating the Order with the likes of sextortionist rings such as 764, incorrectly claiming that Cadenhead's cabal is a direct offshoot of the Angles.
764 is basically an online extortion ring deliberately going after minors, forcing them to record or live stream very inappropriate things and dealing those clips on the dark web. They use threats, blackmail, and manipulation to get clips of these minors doing very inappropriate acts, which they then share with their peers on Telegram, which happens to also be their base of operation. Notably, these groups have as many as 5,000 active members at a time, and sadly, it doesn't stop there, because once clips are shared on Telegram, other members pick them up and continue to terrorize these innocent kids for more control, and also, as I mentioned, trade them on the dark web. They do all this apparently with the end goal being to gain notoriety and rise in status within their group. That sort of answers the why question, to which then leaves us with who. Who are these guys and where did they come from? Well, they are apparently an offshoot of Order of Nine Angels.
Just a quick side note, it's angle, as in obtuse angle, not angels. Like, come on, Tub, you have 2 million subscribers. I know you probably outsource your scripts most of the time, but at least do a little bit of research on your part.
aka 09A, one of the vilest perpetrators of terrorist ideology around, guided by their affinity for violence and known for their worship of Hitler, Satanism, and pieces of the Wiccan religion.
Not only does the Order predate all of these sextortion networks by many decades, it's stated in the Wired article that 764 essentially branches off from Cult, another sextortion ring where its creator, Bradley Cadenhead, had learned to groom children prior. The only connection these networks have with the Angles is a superficial co-opting of their aesthetics. The second is to serve the Five Eyes as a tool for disinformation in order to mitigate any more potential converts into true Angle ranks.
The CIA names glow in the dark. You can see them if you're driving,
given the dangerous subversive nature the Order poses. And the third is to act as a honeypot in order to catch psychotic predators like Almeida, among others. Case in point is all of the occult paraphernalia seized by law enforcement and showcased in his court documents were not of Angle origin, nor official doctrine. Rather, they were unrelated, or they were from the Eine American Nexion and known honeypot, the Temple of Blood. The decentralized and individualistic nature of the Order is a double-edged sword. The concept of a Nexion is a prime example of that. According to Naus, a book of genuine Eine doctrine, on page 104 in the Notes on Esoteric Tradition section near the end, a Nexion is essentially a gate. There are two types, ones that are within us by virtue of our psyche, and the second one which is physical, where, quote, the acausal is joined with the causal, and where energy may flow from one universe to another. Causal is describing the physical, bound by 3D space. Acausal describes the metaphysical, that which is not bound by 3D space. According to Naus, Nexions are also described as stargates, and are thought to be in literal, physical places in space. The nearest one, apparently, is said to be by the planet Saturn. However, in this context, Nexions are being used to describe breakaways or branch-offs from the original trunk of the O9A. None of them are to be trusted, as anyone can claim Nexion status, from people like Almeida, to people like Joshua Caleb Sutter, the founder of the aforementioned Temple of Blood, and recently confirmed FBI informant since at least 2003. I used to think that these memes you'd see crop up from organized right-wing political rallies, accusing them of being federally sanctioned honeypots, were more or less hyperbole. Some pretty funny jokes and images spawning out of it. A smaller, more cynical part of my mind thought it may have been more of a dismissing of genuine grassroots populist right-wing movements. A way for people online to hand-wave away their lack of real-world participation in lieu of dunking on their political opposition on Zitter. or for the more paranoid, a demoralization tactic. Learning of Joshua Sutter's story is completely 180'd my opinion. I now assume that these rallies are federally sanctioned honeypots until proven otherwise. Joshua Sutter is a very interesting man whom has led a very interesting life. From his teenage years to the present, the man has been entrenched in extreme political ideology. His father, David Sutter, is a retired minister and white supremacist whom ran the Southern Patriot Shop and was a prominent member within the League of the South, a Southern secessionist group. Joshua would follow in his father's footsteps and then some. He too would become a preacher, but for the Church of the Sons of Yahweh, a white supremacist Christian identity group. He would also join and rise to the ranks of the Aryan Nations, a neo-Nazi and white supremacist organization that has been considered a domestic terrorism threat, as they were directly named by the FBI in their congressional statement regarding the subject. The organization today, however, is considered inactive, and its leadership and members fragmented. During Joshua's early involvement with the Aryan Nations, his extremism was genuine. After the September 11th attacks on the World Trade Centers, Joshua would assume the title of Minister for the Islamic Liaison, essentially acting as a means of communication and a diplomat for any potential radical jihadi groups looking to ally themselves with the Aryan Nations. It would be in 2002 when he would catch the attention of federal authorities after he released a message of solidarity and support for Saddam Hussein, wishing for the extinction of the evil regime of the United States. Quote, "It is my humble opinion before God, the creator of the universe, that the evil regime of the United States that supports the genocide of God-fearing people and serves only one master, the satanic Jew, shall be utterly wiped off the face of the earth. Numerous individuals here in the States who are aware of the true nature of the world situation are fortifying in rural areas. The light of God and truth shall only shine at full light in the Western world, when the sickness of Jewish influence is wiped away completely." Joshua would continue his work within the High Council of the Aryan Nations, alongside his associate and one of the former leaders of the Aryan Nations, August Kreese, partaking in rallies, posting on the nation's website, and participating in the Church of the Sons of Yahweh, even calling himself a Phineas priest, a term stemming from a story in the Old Testament. A Hebrew man named Phineas whom killed an interfaith couple and was given permanent priesthood as a reward, this term being used in a racial context in this case. It wouldn't be until 2003 when Joshua would be arrested by federal agents after attempting to buy a Glock with an obliterated serial number, along with an unregistered suppressor in Philadelphia. His father saying his son left with a friend on that day, and his next contact would be a 2-minute phone call from a Philly-based jail. His arrest being a part of a larger sting operation involving David Wayne Hull, a longtime associate of the Aryan Nations, to whom Joshua had met at the Aryan Nations World Congress. Hull himself was an imperial wizard of the White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. According to the Cult Education Institute article, the FBI used an undercover informant posing as a demolition, firearms, and paramilitary training expert in order to infiltrate branches of the Aryan Nations and the Ku Klux Klan. The informant saying he could easily acquire explosives, namely hand grenades. He even offered Kreese a supply of them, this immediately raising suspicions as he was a new convert. Kreese rejecting this offer and saying, "You're new, and people right off the bat aren't going to trust you." Kreese and another Aryan Nations member, Charles John Judah, had been told by Hull that he feared he was being set up, as a month prior, the informant had traded a cell phone to Hull in exchange for a pipe bomb. Hull would later attempt to purchase 10 hand grenades from the informant in an apparent plan to blow up a number of abortion clinics. Both were arrested, charged, and sentenced. Joshua himself would be found guilty of illegal weapons possession and sentenced to 2 years in prison. It wouldn't be until late 2004 when he would be released and move back to his home in South Carolina. Not long after his release, Joshua would go to work with his father at the Southern Patriot Shop and continue in his extremist ideologies, however with a strange twist. He continued his leadership roles in the Southern Carolina branch of the Aryan Nations, but he would also found a political party on the date of his release from prison, the RPP, or the Rural People's Party. A supposed member of the RPP would submit the party's biography and its history to the Department of Religious Studies in San Diego, a political party that would ascribe to a few different ideologies throughout its lifetime. As stated in its biography, it was initially founded to push forward the ideas of the Maoist internationalist movement. However, they would branch away from the MIM after some philosophical disagreements. Through these disagreements, they would find and resonate with the work of Jim Jones, the founder of the People's Temple and of Jonestown infamy. And they would later ascribe to Juche, the state-sanctioned ideology of North Korea. Joshua himself would continue in his work with the Aryan nations under the pseudonym Wolfram Hall, among others, publishing articles on their website, engaging in their forums, and even recommending books for violent revolutionaries. It wouldn't be until mid-2005 when accusations of Joshua's status as a federal informant would begin to circulate, in what you'll come to find in a long string of entrapment operations. The first would come in the form of a letter from Pastor Maurice L. Goulet, accusing Joshua of entrapping him and another Aryan Nations member, Charles Scott Thornton. He would go on accusing Joshua of setting up both men on conspiracy to commit bank robbery, saying, "Let me say that this entire debacle was an FBI setup from the very beginning. There would be no alleged crimes were it not for an FBI informant/agent provocateur, one Joshua Caleb Sutter, a now former member of the Church of the Sons of Yahweh/Legion of Saints." He would go on saying that they had been there for Joshua in his time of need, especially during his 2-year stint in prison, kept in constant contact, and even aided him monetarily through prison and after he was released. Even though the alleged betrayal cut deep, Goulet wished no retaliation towards Joshua and for him to be left alone, ending the letter off with, "Yahweh the Father knows how to call the righteous to repentance and reserve the wicked for judgment. Joshua will not go uncounted." The archived article from National Justice, yes, that National Justice, would go on to say a source with more insight into what may have happened to the two men was Joshua had goaded both into empty talk of bank robbery while drunk, and had allegedly recorded the whole thing. Both Thornton and Goulet would ultimately be charged and plead guilty to conspiracy to commit bank robbery, conspiracy to possess a firearm to rob a bank, and possession of a firearm as a convicted felon and forfeiture. Goulet had 2 previous convictions in 97 and 99. He would be sentenced to 72 months in prison, and Thornton would be sentenced to 60 months. Not long after this letter's revelation, according to Nate Thayer's article on Joshua and the RPP, he would essentially be blacklisted from both the Aryan Nations and from the Church of the Sons of Yahweh. As far as I can find on the archives of the Aryan Nations website, most mentions of the Wolfram Hall name, both as a High Council member and in the admin section, would be erased by mid-July 2005. Except for one mentioning of him in a message from the Aryan Nation/Tabernacle of the Phineas Priesthood. The linked article seems to be lost to time. And by mid-August the same year, that too would be scrubbed from the site. In the following years, Joshua would turn his focus towards the Rural People's Party and his supposed support for the North Korean government and the ideology of Juche. This chapter is a bit of a doozy, as Joshua's Rural People's Party had an actual chance at establishing a connection with genuine leadership in the DPRK. However, it would not end too dissimilarly from his fallout of the Church of Yahweh and the Aryan Nations, albeit with a lot more drama and an alleged attempted assassination. Our story begins with John Paul Cupp. Just like Joshua, he too has a very colorful background in extreme ideology and politics. At just 19, he joined the Communist Party of Portland, Oregon. Not long after that, he would create the Songun Politics Study Group, USA. The group followed the tenets of the Songun policy of North Korea, a military-first policy emphasizing the crucial role of importance the armed forces has within the backbone of the state, that the country's survival and prosperity is dependent upon its strength. Cupp pledging his loyalty to Pyongyang and the DPRK. Most interestingly, not long after the group's founding, Cupp would receive blessings from the North Korean government itself. In their letter to Cupp, it states, "Pyongyang extends militant greetings to you who extends warm support and solidarity to the Songun policy of our respected Marshal Kim Jong-il, treasured sword of our nation." The letter would go on saying that the whole of Korea, both the North and the South, would know of this newly created branch of the Songun policy within the land of the United States, the bulwark of imperialism, and wish to deepen their relationship. Not long after, on the 2-year anniversary of 9/11, the Rondong Sinmum, the official news outlet for the Central Committee of the Workers' Party of Korea, would report on the group's formation. Cupp would even be appointed as the group's lead chairman by Pyongyang itself. His ideologies wouldn't end with his odd allegiance to the despotic state, however. He would embrace the tenets of white nationalism, Islamic jihad, anti-Semitism, and advocate for an armed coup of the standing United States government, going as far to show his admiration for many different lone wolves to be emulated, praising the likes of Timothy McVeigh, otherwise known as the Oklahoma City Bomber, those whom assassinated sitting presidents, and James Earl Ray, Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassin. Even though there's a more ideological difference between the North Koreans and people like Kup, the glue that holds them together is their hatred for the United States and their admiration for the Kim dynasty. Kup saying, "My personal opinion is that the great leader Comrade Kim Il-sung and dear leader Comrade Kim Jong-il are the two greatest human beings in the entire history of the world. For us, it would be impossible to even wake up in the morning should we lose the ability to cherish them." This loyalty didn't only grant him a letter of official sanctioning and favorable news coverage from within North Korea, but it also gave him the opportunity to visit the country on many different occasions, Kup being photographed at a variety of different locations within the country, from the southern mountainside to the top of Juche Tower, and even at the decentralized zone, with military personnel and caste scholars. Kup would remain as head of the Songun politics group for 7 years until his eventual ousting because of his erratic behavior and heavy infighting. Before then, he spent those years forging alliances and developing the study group's relationship with the DPRK, the highlight of which was his alliance with Joshua Sutter and his Rural People's Party. During the time of Kup's lead chairmanship of the SPG, he would meet other like-minded people whom shared his alliances to the DPRK, specifically 2 other men of note: Kevin Walsh, a white nationalist, whom first aligned himself with Kup in 2004. However, the alliance would be put on hold, as not long after, Walsh would have a standoff with Phoenix, Arizona police after threatening to assassinate the then sitting president, George W. Bush. His release would come 2 years later in 2006, after which he would resume his relationship with Kup, joining not only the SPG, but another one of Kup's political organizations, the American Committee Against Zionism and Imperialism, or NACAZI for short, and co-creating the European American Socialist People's Front alongside Kup. According to Walsh, both these organizations were just websites, used to write essays and solicit support. They had no following or street organization, and would ultimately prove ineffective in their endeavors. The other was a man by the name of Zaid Shakir al-Jashiri, a Palestinian-American whom initially ran NACAZI with Kup, and was also Kup's deputy chairman of the SPG. Somewhere along the way, Kup would gain a direct line of contact to the DPRK. Their connection would come through something called the Committee for Cultural and Foreign Relations Organization, specifically through a man by the name of Zo Il-min. However, Welsh would come to question the validity of the group's connection to the DPRK. Quote, "Kup told me that Zo Il-min is from Southern Korea, but had moved to the DPRK, and that he has a cable connection to an email address in Japan to do Songun work internationally. I don't know if it's true, and whether the Juche study group is really sanctioned by the DPRK government. Given the sort of people that they've been tolerating in positions of leadership recently, I certainly hope not." It wouldn't be until mid-2007 when Kup would first encounter Joshua and the RPP, after they released a message of solidarity and support for the Cambodian dictator, Pol Pot, on a pro-Khmer Rouge website. In his message of praise to the doctrine of Pol Potism, he would include an invite of sorts, saying, "Please find as follows some links to photographs taken at the CPC, a place of which all who uphold the glorious line of the CPK are most gloriously welcome." Joshua ending it off with showcasing a Khmer flag flying over the RPP's headquarters. Said headquarters would be a single-wide mobile home, adorned with all manner of niche communist propaganda, stationed on a 3.5-acre plot of land Joshua's parents had purchased a few years prior. It would be about a month later when Kup would write back congratulating the RPP's courage and defense of Pol Pot within the borders of the US, saying, "It takes a lot of courage and guts to defend democratic Kampuchea and Comrade Pol Pot in the US." It would be at the tailor end of the year in December 2007 when Kup, Zaid, Joshua, and his then-girlfriend, now wife, Jillian Hoy, would have their first in-person meeting. However, the couple would not use their real names. Instead, they would use the aliases David Woods and Comrade Morrison. Those within the SPG would only find out their real names later on. After the 2007 meeting, the RPP would release a letter of warm greetings featured on the Songun Politics Study Group's website, celebrating Kim Jong-il's 10th year as General Secretary of the Workers' Party of Korea. The latter end of the message reading, "In honor of these occasions, our comrades here are erecting a large sign high in the Pine Woods forest of South Carolina, emblazoned with the slogan, 'Great leader Kim Il-sung is immortal,' and are filled with proletarian joy and devotion to the Juche idea. Songun politics and the invincible force and instrument of revolution that is the Workers' Party of Korea. Long life, dear leader Comrade Kim Jong-il. Long live the Invincible Workers' Party of Korea. Our very best wishes. Central Committee, Rural People's Party. It would be later the same year when the seeds of suspicion for the couple's sincerity would be planted and begin to sprout. The first major red flag would come from Woods, aka Joshua, discussing his alleged involvement in the sending of anthrax to the White House and his desire and ability to conduct more attacks. Walsh recalling a conversation he had with Cupp during his interview with NK News. Quote, Cupp did tell me that Woods/Sutter had been talking about having been involved with sending anthrax to the White House. Zaid, however, was highly skeptical of Joshua's claims, saying it takes an immense amount of knowledge and technical know-how, along with expensive laboratory equipment, to create such a deadly toxin, something Zaid believed Joshua wasn't capable of. Walsh would recall Zaid saying, weapons-grade anthrax isn't something some redneck can make during a weekend in his tool shed. Walsh would go on saying that if Zaid was correct in his recalling of his and Joshua's conversation, then it would seem to him that Joshua was some kind of government provocateur, and he was actively engaging in an entrapment sting. The couple's deceptions would only ramp up from here, as they set their sights on total takeover of the Songun Politics Study Group, and subsequently try to gain their connection to DPRK leadership. Early in the year of 2008, according to Nate Thayer's article, Cupp had fallen in love with the aforementioned Jillian Hoy. Jillian would reciprocate these feelings, but not because of any shared romantic interest, but as an opportunity for control. Jillian would go along with Cupp even saying that they were to be married. However, this relationship would end the same year. In July of 2008, Cupp became extraordinarily ill and had to be hospitalized for chronic appendicitis and a lung infection. When in the hospital, he wanted to speak to his supposed fiancée. Walsh would reach out on his behalf, but would not receive a reply. Cupp would do so himself once he was released, but he too would be met with radio silence. Cupp, according to Walsh, would come to the conclusion that this whole debacle was in fact a setup. Further accusations would come from Jason Adam Tonis, the man whom would eventually become Cupp's successor. From his point of view, the RPP and the Songun Politics Study Group were in good standing with each other. However, they would abruptly cut off all ties in June of 2008, Tonis going on to say, quote, the whole RPP action was designed as a government attempt to seize control over the study group. With Cupp dead, Woods, or Joshua Sutter, would have become the study group leader and thus have an inside connection to DPRK leadership. Tonis even claiming that Joshua had boasted to him that he was responsible for poisoning Cupp, and that he and Jillian were the ones in a relationship. Quote, Sutter later boasted to me that Jillian was in fact his own girlfriend, and that he had indeed poisoned Cupp. Joshua would even go as far to allegedly attempt to recruit others within the SPG for his coup against Cupp, but these attempts would ultimately prove fruitless. It would be the same year, in November of 2008, when Joshua and Jillian would get married, specifically on the 18th, commemorating the legacy of martyrdom left by the followers of Jim Jones and his People's Temple of the Disciples of Christ. The betrayal felt by the SPG from the RPP was immense and would only grow more hostile, beginning with the aforementioned Jason Adam Tonis before his eventual leadership of the Songun Politics Group. Cupp, Walsh, Joshua, and another member of the RPP by the name of James Perazzo would clash over their new potential recruit. Tonis had contacted the RPP as he was interested in working with them. However, he was unaware of the bad blood between the two parties and would be caught off guard by the RPP's private denunciation. He would go on to contact Cupp and inform him of this. Tonis would go on saying that during his first interaction, they would claim to be the real representatives of the AINDF, or the Anti-Imperialist National Democratic Front, as the RPP was provided with officially sanctioned North Korean propaganda during their partnership with the Songun Politics Group, and after they had made Juche their guiding ideology. But according to Cupp in his email to Walsh regarding Tonis' conversation with the RPP, the only reason the AINDF even contacted the RPP was at his suggestion, a suggestion he had come to greatly regret. Tonis would go on to inform Cupp of his conversation with the RPP and their denunciation, but Cupp would fire back with his own, telling the new recruit that he believes the RPP was an FBI/CIA sanctioned honeypot, created in order to infiltrate the SPG. Tonis would write back to the RPP requesting comment on the allegations of this federally sanctioned infiltration. Quote, Someone has told me that your leader, Woods, was formerly a member of a white gang. He and a few others did something, got caught by the cops, and Woods snitched to avoid jail time. This person believes that Woods founded the RPP as an FBI/CIA or other government attempt to infiltrate the American Songun movement and the DPRK. Care to comment on these allegations? Tonus would end off his email with an appeal to emotion, saying, "I wish you would be more open with me. A communist party is supposed to be a family, but how can we ever become a family when you don't even tell me your names? All you do is keep secrets. Secrecy is important for some kind of political work, but how can we even build a party if we don't even know each other's names?" In his bid for understanding, Tonus would only find harsh rebuke. Woods, aka Joshua, would only respond by blowing up the bridge in its process of being built, ending any and all friendships between him and the RPP, and demanding that all party materials in Tonus's possession be returned. He would end off his message with what Tonus interpreted as a veiled threat. Quote, "Should you choose not to reciprocate in the requested manner, we will take other measures." The panicked Tonus would go on to email Cup, telling him of their threat, and asking Cup what should be done. Cup would respond by saying that a fight would likely ensue, both figuratively and literally. However, he sought to avoid wasting years of their lives, along with the possibility of death and incarceration. In order to avoid such a scenario, Cup opted to warn Joshua, otherwise he would reveal his true identity to the world. But he was just uncertain of how far Joshua was willing to go. Cup telling Tonus that he couldn't promise that they aren't crazy enough to try and kill him, saying, "Woods is crazy enough that if he feels all is lost, to just drive up to such said address and kill him. He really is that nuts. He'd do that to me also. However, if it was to come down to such a violent showdown, the SPG would fight them ruthlessly." Cup would end off his email showing great concern of well-meaning communistic types seeking an outside-the-box option, saying the RPP would be responsible for their serious harm or deaths, along with calling for the elimination of the RPP at some point. He would merely opt to see if they imploded on their own before any such action would be taken. Even though the infighting raged on between the RPP and the SPG, this didn't stop Joshua and Jillian from their infiltration into various religious organizations within South Carolina. If you thought the roster of extreme ideology couldn't get stranger, you'd be in for a curveball. In 2009, Joshua and Jillian and other prominent leaders within the white power movements at the time would describe and create a new church devoted to the worship of the Hindu deity Kali, a goddess associated with time, change, creation, power, destruction, and death, with an emphasis on the death and destruction. Their new place of worship would be called the New Bihar Mandir Temple, headquartered in the same single white home as the Rural People's Party. Joshua taking on the role of a Hindu Hare Krishna priest, along with adopting a new alias, going by Shri Shri Kalki Kalika Mandir, and Jillian taking the role of a Hindu priestess, donning the new name Jayalalitha Devi Dasi. The temple would specifically promote the head of the Tamil Tigers, a violent guerrilla group whom also shared Joshua and Jillian's devotion to Kali. The Tamil Tigers are largely responsible for the popularization of the use of suicide vests. They even had a specialized unit devoted to the practice, a unit called the Black Tigers. They were not alone in this formation of the new temple, however. Among the new converts was James Perazzo, the former leader of the then largest white power and terrorist organization operating in the US, known as the American Front. Just like his colleague, he too had odd ascriptions to strange ideology and accusations of double agency. Perazzo would take control of the American Front in 1996 and espouse the tenets of third positionism, a fusion of far-right radical politics and communistic economic policies. It wouldn't be until 2001 when Perazzo and American Front would draw significant ire from the state, as after the 9/11 terror attacks, he and others began promoting the likes of Hamas, Hezbollah, and Osama bin Laden. This ire would cause Perazzo to go into hiding, along with the tactical hibernation of American Front. An odd revelation would also surface in late 2011 from former American Front member Kent McLennan, telling of Perazzo's illicit drug dealings, his ascribed devotions to Hinduism, Satanism, and Islam, and his alleged contributions to Libya, saying the Libyan government had attempted to give him a payout of $3 million, but was stopped by federal authorities. He had been associated with the RPP since at least before the official alliance with the SPG. It wouldn't be much longer after the formation of the Bihar Temple when the leadership within the Songun Politics Study Group began to waver. John Paul Cupp would break off from the teachings of Juche and convert to Islam. This conversion would draw the ire of Kevin Walsh, Cup's right-hand man. He would decry this and claim his conversion to be fake, citing Cup's founding of the Aryan Atheists Facebook group 3 weeks prior to his religious revelation. He would subsequently cut all ties with the man, along with resigning from the SPG's sister groups, the Nakazi and the EASP. It was only in early 2011 when Cup was phased out of the Songun entirely, and left Jason Adam Tonis to take his place as head leadership. The study group would release a statement regarding the change later at the tail end of 2011, saying, in February 2011, John Paul Cup's mentally ill state and devotion reached to a point whereby he totally abandoned Juche and communism. Jason Adam Tonis was left to take over leadership of the group and try to rebuild it. He decided to lead it in a strictly orthodox Juche Songun framework, away from racism and all those who supported racist ideas. Jason Adam Tonis, since 2009, had always opposed John Paul Cup's white nationalist line, but his attempts to lead Cup back to the orthodox Juche camp always ended in failure due to Cup's increasing mental illness. Later the same year in 2011, both James, Joshua, and presumably others within the RPP would attempt to seize power from the new leadership of the SPG by creating a few different Juche and Pyongyang loyal organizations under different pseudonyms, trying to undermine the legitimacy of the SPG and their leader, Jason Adam Tonis. One of which was the United Juche Front of North America, created by Tyler Moses, a pre-existing name Joshua had used in his Aryan Nation days. Another group went by the name New Resistance, a front organization led by Perazo. Those within the SPG were able to see through this ruse, and because of poor OPSEC on Joshua's part, were able to uncover his identity fairly quickly. Tonis would release a statement unmasking Joshua and his other aliases, and decrying the former chairman, John Paul Cup, and blaming him for the hampered development of the Songun Politics Study Group, saying his flirtations with white nationalism deviated away from Kim Il-sungist thought, saying those deviations are what led to accepting suspect characters such as Joshua and James into the SPG. If it weren't for that, the two would not have been considered for membership otherwise. Tonis would end off the statement with a warning to any potential new recruits to avoid Perazo and his new resistance group. Both men would fire back at Tonis by creating yet another front group, the Swords of Songun, a thinly veiled means of attack at the new leader of the SPG. Perazo's new resistance chiming in as well, saying, New Resistance urges all revolutionary organizations to break communication with Tonis and his fake Juche honeytrap pigs work. However, their efforts would be in vain, as the North Korean government would continue to prop up the Songun Politics Study Group in their media. The SPG may have survived the attacks and an undermining of legitimacy from Joshua and James, but the harmony Tonis had hoped for would not come, as the infighting continued, namely between Tonis and Kevin Walsh, Cup's former right-hand man. Walsh had discovered Tonis' denunciation of white supremacy and his focus towards the teachings of Juche. Walsh, being an avowed white nationalist and racial separatist, objected, saying that he did not believe that white nationalism was incompatible with Juche and communism, and that the North Korean people keep their blood pure, and so should European American people, he argued. Ending his message to Tonis with, I support solidarity with the Korean people against imperialism, but I don't knowingly work with liars, hypocrites, fraudsters, and traitors. Tonis would respond fairly violently, demanding Walsh submit to his orders, otherwise the next time he sees him, he'll gladly crack his skull open. Nate Thayer reached out to both Cup and Tonis for comment requests. Cup would respond under a new name, Waleed Cup, saying he supported the Korean people's stance against American imperialism. However, he has become a practicing Muslim and no longer is directly involved with the Songun Politics Study Group. Tonis responded informing them of his declining health, but is more than happy to discuss his love for the DPRK. He did not respond to any further questions. Nate Thayer would also reach out to Joshua and James, but the two would remain radio silent. The Songun Politics Study Group and its former core circle of membership and leaders seems to have dissolved, or at the very least, has faded into the heavy shadow of obscurity. The Rural People's Party seems to have taken that same route, as all that remains is a dead website. Joshua and his cohorts, on the other hand, seem to remain fairly active and have been for quite some time. It wouldn't be until 2016, through a Freedom of Information Act request and subsequent lawsuit by a man named William A. White, were further revelations of not only Joshua's activities, but just how far the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force was willing to go in order to arrest perceived terrorists. The organization, in its crusade to fight off this domestic terrorism, would ironically incite and create far more terror in its wake. Joshua, at this point, would only be known as Perpetrator 2 in the FOIA request. However, many context clues in the document make it very easy to deduce that Perpetrator 2 is indeed Joshua Sutter. The mentioning of his weapons charge in 2003 and his entrapment of the aforementioned Charles Thornton and Maurice Goulet being fairly solid evidence of that. White would go on saying he had initially met Joshua during an anti-Zionist rally in Washington, D.C. in 2002, while covering the event for a Russian news outlet, Pravda.ru. During Joshua's prison time, his father, along with his organization, the League of the South, was cooperating with the FBI, White alleged. He and the Bureau would come together and purchase the compound that would house many counterintelligence operations, including the creation and managing of the Rural People's Party in order to target the SPG. The operation coming to an end in 2011. White saying, "It was the home of the Rural People's Party, a fraudulent organization created by the FBI and led by perpetrator number 2. Person number 3, also an FBI informant, is the wife of perpetrator number 2 and was involved in the operation. Persons 4 through 10 were among the targets, though none appear to have ever been charged." Another case of attempted entrapment White would cite would be in the form of August Crease III in 2005. Crease being a friend and associate of Joshua prior to his arrest in 2003 during his time in the Aryan Nations. Crease, at the behest of Joshua, would move from Pennsylvania to a home in Lexington, South Carolina to be closer to Joshua's compound. Soon after, Joshua would allegedly suggest Crease go on a local Lexington news station and pledge his allegiance to Adolf Hitler and Al-Qaeda. However, it's likely he did not need much persuasion, as not long before his move to Lexington, he would agree to an interview with Henry Schuster in late March of 2005, espousing his praise of the jihadists whom had hijacked the planes on 9/11, saying, "You say they're terrorists, I say they're freedom fighters, and I want to instill the same jihadic feelings in our people's hearts, in the Aryan race, that they have for their father, who they call Allah." White would go on to heavily cite a man named David Galletti in his book Undercover Nazi, paid $60 for this by the way, a former FBI JTTF informant whom had personally targeted White from 2005 to 2006. His book would go on to shed a bright light onto the mentalities held within the JTTF and their informants, including Galletti's. During his investigations into these organizations, his targets, quote, were law-abiding citizens for the most part, just convinced in their beliefs. The full paragraph reading, "The skinheads always traveled in a group, and it was common knowledge and fact that safety was in numbers. It took almost 2 years to build my crew, and the miraculous part was, the skinheads had no idea we were undercover operatives. We carefully chose them one by one. Despite the fact that they believed in an Aryan America and the white power movement, they were all law-abiding citizens for the most part, just convinced in their beliefs, and willing to take a stand for them. The majority of the skinheads were not only hate-mongers and racist, they thought nothing of manslaughter and could snap at any given moment with actions of violence." White citing another quote on page 117, quote, "The sad part," Gleddy writes, "is that most people he was targeting were not breaking the law." The full paragraph reading, "The FBI was ecstatic. There were multiple protests and rallies going on across America by white power organizations. The sad part is, they were not breaking the law. Yes, what they do behind the scenes is another thing, but constitutionally, putting on a protest with permits is accepted by the government, local city, and police. So when you have a protest, if you do it in the allotted amount of time and file for the proper permits, each city has to spend at least $200,000 for their protection and to protect the city and the people from rioting." However, this did not deter Gleddy, nor his handlers at the JTTF. White citing this fairly chilling excerpt from his book, quote, "It is the FBI, sir. They do whatever they want. They go wherever they want to go. They don't ask for permission, and they don't ask for forgiveness." The full context of this quote being from Gleddy's arrest and subsequent interrogation by Bloutsville PD. Not long after he had traveled to the town on his way to a Klan rally, he had essentially blown his cover with the local PD, as he had been asking around about illegals and drug trafficking, along with being seen at the scene of a crime as a Mexican was being assaulted by some skinheads. The town seemed to have been riddled with undocumented workers and illicit drug activity. Although not part of his assignment, he felt the need to investigate further and report it to the proper authorities. The police chief not taking too kindly to this. Quote, "Another mistake. The police chief reiterated this was his town, and no other law enforcement agency had the right to conduct any business without his consent. And he swore if they were going to do any work, they would have called him. I tried to explain. It is the FBI, sir. They do whatever they want. They go wherever they want. They don't ask for permission, and they don't ask for forgiveness." During his time as an informant, Gleddy would be in charge of intel gathering, going about this by organizing otherwise legal events, or in his case, honeypots, collecting all manner of info on those whom attended, including photographing and filming people involved, their vehicles and license plates, and subjecting them to searches of their persons, looking for any potential illicit paraphernalia or contraband, a practice that is otherwise illegal under the Fourth Amendment. These heavy restrictions would be deployed in the Toledo 2 rally, where he first met White, and later attempted again in a rally in Orlando, Florida, both of which Gleddy had helped organize. Their justification for this was a riot that had happened a month prior, or the original Toledo rally. Gleddy saying on page 126 that 8 Nazis came into Toledo, antagonized the black community, and provoked a riot. White would tell a different story, however, as he was there. He claims in both his FOIA request and later in his huge filing that this riot was, in part, caused by law enforcement and was set up by federal informants posing as local residents, saying FBI confidential human source Jeff Shope tasked him with aiding a march against black crime. In the morning of the 2005 rally in Toledo, police and the FBI gathered in the same parking lot as the National Socialist members and would soon direct them to drive through a crowd of angry counter-protesters, and predictably, this started problems, he said. They were able to make it through, but not long after their march began, more violence erupted. According to White, the counter-protesters only attacked the police and none of the NSM members, saying none of them were even visible when the violence began. They were forced to turn back and end the rally. The overarching point White is making here is these events serve as precursors in order to, as White states, establish credibility in wherever the FBI JTTF happens to be operating. White also saying in a lawsuit he filed in July of 2017 that the FBI JTTF would also arrange for violent counter-demonstrations through informants in groups such as Anti-Racist Action, stating these rallies would be set up on federal holidays and the agents overseeing these operations would pay themselves more money in order to monitor these rallies that they themselves organized. Not only that, but it was also in an effort to build a giant database, or to expand the FBI's intellectual files. Quote, "There's no doubt we were expanding our characters, but we were also building intellectual files for the FBI. Thousands of miles, hundreds of photographed faces, and a myriad of tape recordings were contributing to the eradication of racial and religious prejudice in America." Another contention point White cites in his document is essentially the targeting of thought crimes. White saying, "The target was explicitly thought and First Amendment protected associations. Agent Kevin Farrington wanted us to disable their racist minds," Gleddy writes. Gleddy says that his mission was to take them down and disrupt them any way you can. Or, as Gleddy says that Special Agent Farrington put it, plant a bomb of paranoia and disruption at the heart of this group, then fuck with their minds until they break. Much of the context for this was in regards to the Confederate Hammerskins, the FBI's nemesis of Central Florida, as Gleddy puts it. They would essentially set up a giant surveillance party, and the most egregious crime they would capture was the snorting of cocaine. Gleddy would spend the last couple of chapters describing his infiltration into the Hammerskins, attending their parties, and at the end, he participated in a sting that ended in an arrest in regards of holding a drug dealer at gunpoint and stealing his supply of crack cocaine. The quotes White citing coming from the beginning of chapter 16, Gleddy saying, "The FBI had been after the Hammerskins in Central Florida for years. Agent Kevin spoke with honesty that they had other operatives close to taking the group down, but they would never step up to the plate with conviction. They liked their lives. For the first time I understood what the FBI had in mind from the start of this mission. They had to be certain we contained the strength and guts to take this violent group apart. Agent Kevin was adamant that he did not simply want arrests and convictions. He wanted us to disable their racist minds and group." On the third paragraph of the page, Gleddy would write, "It was no longer just a party or an event here and there. It was a 24/7 job of crime and fear. Our orders were explicit. Plant the bomb of paranoia and disruption at the heart of this group, then fuck with their minds until they break." Gleddy would go on to describe some fairly egregious crimes committed by the Hammerskins, which, if true, would certainly lend a bit more justification to the FBI and JTTF's operation. At least specifically with the Hammerskins. Quote, "The parties were where they brought, sold, and used drugs. We heard young girls scream while they were being raped by these thugs at the parties. Even now as I tell the story, I get sick inside with just the memory. I watched with my hands tied while they beat a young black boy as he walked with a white girl at his side. The events were used to plan robberies, domestic terrorism, murder, and other criminal violations. I stood as close as I could, hoping my wire picked up locations." White would go on to claim that a good chunk of time during Gleddy's status as an informant was the preparation for future work, as many of his targets were in fact informants themselves. White would cite a couple of examples, the first being with a man by the name of James Langston. Langston being one of 3 men that both Gleddy and his associate Joe had met up with in order to accompany them to Hatefest in Hobe Sound, Florida. Langston himself had just gotten done serving a prison sentence for third-degree manslaughter. During their trip, he would incessantly talk about the selling of cocaine. Quote, James was talking away about selling cocaine out of his trailer in Melbourne, all the while I was thinking, keep talking and hang yourself. He would end up meeting him once again in Toledo, Ohio, but this time something seemed off. Quote, James was part of the World Church of the Creator, and I went over to shake his hand. He remembered me, but something was wrong. He seemed a little nervous, and I was sure that he was caught selling drugs, and now was a criminal informant. The next example White would cite would be his work with the League of the South, specifically mentioning his interaction with Rick Spring, one of the former leaders of the League of the South. Gleddy had met him through a man named Sonny Hodges, an old school Klan member whom he had met online. After some friendly online rapport, Hodges would invite Gleddy to attend a rally in Lawrence, South Carolina, at the Old Redneck Shop, hosted by the League of the South. Rick would take a liking to both Gleddy and Joe, and would end up asking them to attend more rallies and join their networks, as they were looking for more survivalist militia types. According to Gleddy, after their meeting, Rick and Sonny would end up exchanging a large sum of money for a nondescript brown paper bag. Quote, we were ready to head out for the room when Sonny said, hey, wait a minute, Rick, and Rick nonchalantly handed him what seemed to be at least $10,000. He said, here it is, and he grabbed a brown paper bag full of whatever. Of course, it was obviously cocaine, because Sonny had mentioned earlier that he had ways of making extra money without elaborating, but it was obvious. White stating in his FOIA request that Rick Spring was also an informant. Quote, Rick Spring sent out an email maybe a decade ago, admitting that he was an informant too. Thus, what the FBI and JTTF were doing were building up Gleddy through their front groups in preparation for future work. In 2005, members of Sutter's League of the South helped build up Gleddy. Gleddy and his legal militia, as he calls it, would go and assist those within Wiggins, Mississippi, at the behest of Dr. Michael Hill, president of the League of the South. All of this in an effort to gain a more favorable reputation within the white power movement as a whole, which would ultimately do just that. They would end up spreading the word, and thus the infiltration would begin. Quote, this was a considerable step up. The Klan group, Church of the Jesus Christ Christian, invited me to their yearly congressional meeting in Scottsboro, Alabama. Another group invited me to their yearly meeting and party on Jekyll Island, Georgia. The National Socialist Movement called and asked me to attend a rally they were having in Toledo, Ohio. I was making great progress, and right where the FBI needed me. Spending so much time and effort over the last couple of years building my character, getting to be known and accomplishing missions was finally paying dividends. Beyond the questionable intel gathering, White would go on to describe the rampant cocaine abuse. Quote, I have attended white nationalist events for almost 2 decades, and I've never seen cocaine at one. Confirming this when Gleddy describes the use of cocaine in his book. It is almost exclusively the federal informants using it. This is true when Gleddy, Joe, and Spring use cocaine, while others refrain, and it is true when Gleddy and Langston use cocaine. Much of the context for this that White is citing is for private parties or private gatherings. The context for page 44 is during a Hammerskins pool party, where everyone, including Gleddy, was indeed using the drug. Page 61 describes the same initial meeting between Rick, Sonny, Joe, and Gleddy, along with another one of Rick's associates, a man by the name of Laszlo. Just before the alleged cocaine deal, they were having a smoke session, all except for Laszlo, saying he didn't smoke, but in fact preferred sugar on his donuts. Page 71 took place supposedly after Hate Fest at James Langston's place, and page 156 was in the context of their surveillance party, in a private room where some Hammerskin leadership, along with some members, took part in the illicit drug. White would go on to accuse Gleddy of committing and permitting more violent crime than his targets. Quote, in addition to the introduction of cocaine, Gleddy also commits or permits more violent crime than his targets, another theme of this operation. Gleddy was arrested for felony hate crime assault in Morrisville, Alabama in 2005. The FBI made this go away, as they would make a similar hate crime assault go away for perpetrator number 1 in 2011. The first half of this paragraph is referencing Chapter 9, or the Alabama Slammer. Here, I think White is being dishonest. As it is true Gleddy did get arrested, he was arrested for very dubious reasons. The primary one was because he was asking too many questions, specifically in regard to the high number of undocumented workers and the methamphetamine crisis that Gleddy had observed in the small town. Even when he went in for booking, one of the holding officers unhandcuffed him because he thought the charges were bogus. Really, the only thing you can accuse Gleddy of here is being too up his own ass about being an informant. The assault White referenced is on page 97, taking place at a bar. Gleddy did not take part, he was merely in the vicinity. The bar was in a small town 35 miles away, and we were in a group of 16. They began their usual vulgar and racist behavior, and as I looked on, they began knocking some Mexicans around. They think they are superior and have the right as they beat these young Mexicans down. Of course I was not involved, but I was guilty by association. When I heard them call the cops, I split. The police chief tried to stick whatever he could to him because he didn't like his overly sarcastic attitude. Reading this, Gleddy didn't really do himself any favors. And it is true that the FBI did indeed bail him out, however they were not very happy about it. And it damn near costed him his career as an informant. As Gleddy describes, when you're undercover, you don't go on side missions. Quote, they essentially had told me I fucked up, and, obviously, I didn't know the golden rule. I was learning too quickly, but never leave the primary mission for a secondary mission. Never had I learned more quickly why you do not do that. Through this entire ordeal, Gleddy was trying to get in contact with Agent Kevin Farrington through the arresting officers, and he would eventually get his wish. Quote, hey Agent Kevin, it's Dave, don't say anything, and just listen. We're done. I let you get away with things in the past that you weren't supposed to do because you got so much good evidence, and you've done such good work with us. We have let it slide. We let you have a long rope. We let you have such freedom, and this is how you treat us? We gave you so much rope you ended up hanging yourself with it. It's over. The marriage is over. I want you to get on that damn Greyhound bus, and don't talk to anyone. Get your ass back to Orlando. The minute you get in Orlando, I want you to call Agent Dan, and let him know you're back in town. And I don't want you to do anything until I get back into contact with you. Do you hear me, Mr. Gleddy? Although White's previous citation is a bit dubious, his next citation is far more credible. Gleddy would be very hard-pressed to justify his actions here. Although he tries, I don't think he succeeds. This would be at the Knights Inn in Toledo, Ohio, during a large skinhead gathering. During this, Gleddy would experience his first snowfall. He decided to unwind and walk around in it for a bit. It would be here when the Toledo maintenance man, or just the maintenance man as Gleddy refers to him, would confront him. He would essentially accuse Gleddy of trying to break into cars. Quote, I was walking in the snow and a maintenance man noticed me and pulled up in a Bronco and stopped. I walked up to the vehicle and he said, hey, what are you doing? Dude, I'm walking through the snow. What do you think I'm doing? No, what are you doing? Because you better not be trying to break into cars or I'll kick your ass. Dude, don't get started off the wrong foot or you're gonna have your hands full. You just better not be messing around. I said, okay, whatever. I'll see you around, bro. I'll see you around. I gave him the crazy eye look and he took off. About an hour later, he would come across the parked Bronco and slam a trash can onto it. Some skinheads happened to be walking towards him, saw him throw the trash can on the hood, and asked what the hell was going on. He then accused the maintenance man of talking shit. He would unfortunately show back up and get the skinheads to violently assault him, of which they did just that. Quote, out of the corner of my eye, there he was, the maintenance man. I said, there he is, and the guys with me jumped on him like a pack of hungry wolves. Within seconds, the maintenance man was toast. He got up, brushed off the snow, mud, and blood, then went about his way. We then went our way with a sense of pride. Gleddy's excuse was to blend in further with the skinheads, even though at this point, his cover was not at risk of being blown. Gleddy and his cohorts would encounter White for the first time at the Toledo 2 rally in Ohio at the tail end of 2005. White states that he worked as an organizer for the National Socialist movement at the time. Part of his job was to meet with local groups, otherwise known as units, and help them organize. During his travel to Ohio, White would claim, every person of prominence Gleddy met with was an informant, everyone but White. From this, he deduced that he was the target. His only reason for traveling to Ohio was to create a venue for the Florida-based investigation. White saying, Gleddy was told by Farrington that he was going to be focusing his part of the operation on groups in the Middle District of Florida. Thus his only reason for traveling to Ohio must have been to create a venue for the Florida investigation. At the same time White had met Gleddy, he would also encounter his legal militia, of which Jeff Shope had asked him to assist. However, from the get-go, White became wary. At first, he simply wasn't impressed with the militia that Gleddy had presented to him, but would suspect Gleddy of lying to him soon after. He would report his suspicions to Shope, including the appearance of Gleddy's fellow informant and partner, Joe, appearing to be a black man associated with a supposedly neo-Nazi and white supremacist militia. He recommended Shope cancel the whole ordeal altogether. However, Shope would insist White get the job done. White quoting an excerpt from Gleddy's book, that the feelings of distrust and dislike were mutual. Quote, Bill White may be smart enough to be an attorney, but he is a jerk, and I do not like him. Bill White is a real jerk, but straight to the point, and got the job done. The context here would be White's contention of the imposed rules that Gleddy and the FBI had tried to impose upon the National Socialist Movement protest in Orlando, Florida. White would win this contention, and the protest would be treated like any other. White would go on to write why he believed the JTTF was targeting him. This revelation would come from a meeting he had with another informant by the name of Brian Holland. whom worked as a recruiter of sorts at the National Socialist Movement headquarters, which, according to White, was entirely staffed by federal informants. During this meeting, Holland would ask permission from White in order to run for Congress. White saying he did not need his permission, Holland telling White, "No one was able to do anything in white nationalism if I opposed them." This perception of power came from White's influence and his own intel gathering and dissemination ability, mostly through his website and other publications he wrote for. Because of this, it's reasonable to assume that the erosion of White's influence was at the top of the list for the FBI and JTTF. One of the alleged bombs of paranoia and disruption attempts came in the form of an affair setup. According to White, while he was attending one of Gleddy's Orlando events, a woman by the name of Laura Sennett invited the man to her hotel room. White, being suspicious, brought another party with him. 2 weeks later, his wife received an email claiming White had an affair with the woman, calling it a poison pen email. White would only meet Gleddy a couple of more times after these events, one of which being another attempt at his reduction of influence at a meeting in Lawrence, South Carolina, at the old redneck shop. Hosted by the Aryan nations, many of the speakers at this event directly denouncing White, the last being at an event in Lansing, Michigan, of which he provides no details. White would end off his document talking about a man by the name of Kelly Boaz. According to White, is the third man from the right, pictured here, in the glasses and the hoodie. The man whom he claims is responsible for using perpetrator number 1 and perpetrator number 2, aka Joshua Sutter, to impersonate him in order to frame White for, quote, threatening witnesses and otherwise obstruct justice in this matter with federal authorization, one of the charges he had been convicted for. He goes on to describe Boaz as the prototypical bad cop. According to White's document, Boaz joined the Palm Bay, Florida PD in 1984 and quickly gained a reputation for brutality and fabrication of evidence. For the next 3 decades of his career, he would only flesh out this reputation. He would receive the most reports for civil rights violations on his first year on the job, and be very liberal in his use of excessive force, receiving over a dozen complaints between the years of 1993 and 2004, much of which being the aforementioned accused excessive force, but also just other strange, petty things, like being accused of stealing a woman's license and threatening a young boy with jail time for, quote, harboring a fugitive. White also listing off some more violent uses of force, such as breaking the arm of a robbery suspect, dragging a teenager across a parking lot for an underage drinking citation, twisted the arm of a man so badly he shit himself, and even killed a fleeing suspect. However, to Boaz's credit, according to the Orlando Sentinel, he would have likely been run over if he had not taken such action. He would be disciplined many times over the years and even face suspension, but record of his brutality would continue. This rap sheet, according to White, landed him a job in the FBI's JTTF, sometime between 01 and 07, supposedly taking over for Gleddy after the Orlando Sentinel blew his cover in a 2007 article. Quote, a paid FBI informant was the man behind a neo-Nazi march through the streets of Paramore that stirred up anxiety in Orlando's black community and fears of racial arrest that triggered a major police mobilization. The FBI would not comment on what it knew about the involvement of its informant, 39-year-old David Gleddy of Orlando, in the neo-Nazi event. In court Wednesday, an FBI agent said the Bureau had paid its informant at least $20,000 during the past 2 years. Wow, Gleddy said when reached by phone late Wednesday. It is what it is. You were there in court. I can't really go into any detail now. White would go on to describe the case of the 1st SS Cavalry Brigade, Motorcycle Division, and how Boaz allegedly convinced August Reese III to lead this division. Quote, trading off credibility of Gleddy's militia, Boaz introduced himself to Kreese by email in 2007, as perpetrator number 2 was close to Kreese, and all this appears to have been one operation. It is a reasonable inference that Boaz was working with perpetrator number 2 at this time. Boaz talked Kreese into forming a neo-Nazi biker gang. As Gleddy had now been outed by the Sentinel, Boaz just happened to have a spare biker gang, Gleddy's militia, on hand. The gang was now either called the 1st SS Cavalry Brigade or the 12th SS Cavalry Battalion or some such nonsense. Like the Aryan nations, the Rural People's Party, and the militia, the gang was fraudulent and comprised almost entirely of federal agents and informants. White's assumption of this being part of a larger operation was correct. Ken Silva, over on Headline USA, diving further into the details of this operation, dubbed Primitive Affliction. Essentially another entrapment operation, except this time with the theme of a neo-Nazi motorcycle gang. However, there would be some contending details. White claiming it was Boaz whom talked Kreese into forming the 1st SS Cavalry Brigade. However, according to Ken Silva's article, it would be a man by the name of Robert Killian whom would plant the seed of forming this motorcycle division into Kreese's head. Killian being another informant that worked alongside Boaz in Operation Primitive Affliction. Silva's article going on to say, quote, according to court records, Boaz was introduced to the outlaw bikers and the 1st SS Cavalry in 2009 by his colleague, Killian. By then, Boaz had already infiltrated the Black Pistons biker gang and was posing as one of its members, a renegade bomb maker named Kevin Post. The SPLC article, cited by Ken Silva, going more in depth on Robert Killian, would imply the motorcycle gang was around since at least 2007, not long after Killian had met Kreese and joined the Aryan Nations. Quote, by 2007, Killian was a bona fide member of the Aryan Nations faction led by Kreese. He also became an active member of the 1st SS Cavalry Brigade, an Aryan Nations motorcycle division formed in part by members of the Outlaws, who joined the neo-Nazi group in an unusual alliance. White going on to say that Kreese would be the one to lead this gang. Quote, Kreese, excited at the chance to actually lead something for once in his life, came to Florida, but would not allow the president of the Outlaw Club to join his gang, as the man's mother was Cuban, a fact with no racial connotations. Ken Silva's article would go on to say that Kreese saw this as an opportunity to gain publicity, membership, and increased revenue for the Aryan Nations, going on to say that the gang would end up being led by a man named Brian Close, a member of the Outlaws. However, Close would come to greatly regret his decision, as he was surrounded by informants and undercover operatives. Quote, with Close surrounded by a gaggle of informants and undercover cops, the 1st SS Cavalry clubhouse was open for business. According to internal law enforcement records, there were at least 4 undercover employees and an untold number of informants who infiltrated the group, along with numerous wiretaps and other sophisticated techniques. Regardless of White's conflicting account regarding the origins of the 1st SS Cavalry Brigade, Boaz would still play an integral role in Operation Primitive Affliction, which, at the beginning of 2012, would end in 6 arrests that the SPLC would call major accomplishments. However, it would prove to be anything but. During Boaz's time in Operation Primitive Affliction, he would adopt the pseudonym Kevin Post and act as a bomb maker for the Black Pistons biker gang, and then later for the Outlaws and the SS Cavalry Brigade. It's not a coincidence that 4 out of the 6 people had been charged with threatening to throw a destructive device, but we'll get to that shortly. The major highlight of this case would center around Deborah Plowman, cited by both White and Silva. According to the Sun Sentinel, Boaz had claimed to see Plowman take Vitakin in front of him, presumably at the Bikers Club in Osceola County, Florida. She was arrested at her home in Chicago, Illinois, and later traveled to Florida to face drug trafficking charges. All the while, she was proclaiming her innocence. It would only be later during her interrogation conducted by Boaz where he would realize the same. He had the wrong woman. Not only did he have the wrong suspect, the woman he was looking for had a very different appearance than Plowman. Quote, it turned out Plowman was the wrong person and looked much different from the woman Boaz saw in the bar that night. The differences include Plowman being 7 years older, 3 inches taller, 55 pounds heavier, and with green eyes, brown hair, and no tattoos. The woman Boaz claimed he saw taking drugs had blue eyes, jet black hair with purple highlights, and was covered in tattoos, according to the lawsuit and jail records. Boaz was in fact describing a woman who went by the name Sin, aka Christy Persabilla. Even after realizing he had the wrong person, Boaz would continue with the questioning, particularly about her husband, Peter James, whom apparently was the reason for the mistaken ID, as Boaz was investigating him. However, nothing would really come of that. According to White in his document, Boaz never informed anyone of this. This perjury would only be revealed later during the lawsuit that Plowman had brought against the man, of which she would come to win, and be rewarded $30,000 in damages. The cracks would only continue to show in this case, even after the devastating blow Plowman's defense had dealt. All of the other charges made towards the gang members regarding inciting violence and the use of a destructive device would be dropped by the prosecution, opting to pursue drug-related charges instead. The prosecution would give the Al Capone excuse by getting perceived valuable targets to plead to lesser charges. In this case, drug-related crimes instead of the more egregious violent crimes for which they were accused. Most in this case would plead guilty to these lesser crimes. However, Carlos Eugene Dubose would fight his charges, the same man that Kreese had barred from joining the motorcycle division because his mother was Cuban. Dubose, just like his biker compatriots, was charged with both drug trafficking and threatening to throw a destructive device, facing up to 35 years in prison if convicted. Regarding the drug charge, he was able to receive a greatly reduced sentence. Initially accused of selling 28 grams of oxycodone to an undercover officer, it was discovered the FBI itself had cataloged a weight of merely 9 grams of the sold substance. Successfully reducing the charge, he went on to proclaim his innocence in any sort of bomb-making plot. This destructive device charge originating from a recorded conversation Boaz had with the man back in early 2009. According to Silva's article, Dubose spoke more hypothetically and in more of a worst-case self-preservation scenario. Quote, "We're not looking to do anything. It's just a matter if we start going to war with somebody." This was seemingly the only instance of this conversation happening. Quote, to Dubose's point, the February 27, 2009 conversation he had with Boaz/Post was never developed any further over the next 3 years. Dubose's prosecution would also admit that this conversation was not the proverbial smoking gun they had hoped for. However, they claimed there were other conversations where such plans were made, but no recordings nor documentation of these alleged conversations could be found. Regardless, the judge would take Boaz's side in the matter, and Dubose would take the plea deal not long after. Even though the judge sided with the prosecution, Boaz's credibility would continue to dwindle with each passing hearing. One of the final court proceedings regarding Dubose would be with the matter of the man allegedly pointing a gun to Boaz's head, or so he claimed. However, there was a problem. He didn't report it. Dubose's defense calling him out. Quote, "I've gone through 600 pages of transcripts, reports, and supplemental reports. I don't find it anywhere mentioned in there. Are you telling me that there's some information that y'all did not disclose to us?" Boaz would insist he did indeed report the incident. This report, nor any such documentation of the report being made, could be found. The judge would ultimately side with Boaz, however shakily, saying the evidence did somewhat support Dubose's version of events, but still convicting him on drug trafficking and bomb solicitation charges, citing the totality of evidence. Quote, "The judge noted that Dubose did talk about having a bomb in the event of a war. Therefore, the court finds, viewing the evidence in its totality, that Dubose intended to obtain a destructive device for the purpose of injuring or causing damage to persons or property." Around the same time as the investigation into the SS Cavalry Brigade, another joint investigation would be conducted into the American Front in 2010. According to the Orlando Sentinel, the American Front was another Nazi-influenced group of white supremacists that had been rumored to be conducting combat training in rural Osceola County. Boaz would play another fairly major role in that operation as well, and just like the case of the Cavalry Brigade, according to the Orlando Sentinel, wouldn't end too dissimilarly during court proceedings. Out of the 14 members charged, only 3 would be convicted, and those convictions would carry light sentences. It would only be sometime in 2013, just before the trials of the arrested members of the American Front, where White's role in all this would come into play, and would be the reason for his FOIA request, his other lawsuits, and his incredibly lengthy filing made in 2020. The beginning of this turmoil would be during the Matthew Hale case, where Hale would come to be convicted of plotting to kill Joan Lefkoe, a sitting federal judge at the time. According to White's very lengthy document, Hale was unable to receive 28 USC 2255 relief because of his supposed tainting by his jury foreman. As a response, he would dox the foreman on his website, overthrow.com. Like, dog, you couldn't have just written an article or something? Why'd you have to dox the guy? Regardless, he claims he had no intent to solicit a violent felony. This was a way to fabricate pretext, or so he claimed. He had been charged with this, among other things, and convicted to 30 months in prison. However, White would file a motion for acquittal on First Amendment grounds, of which he would be partially successful. The district judge overseeing his case dismissing one of the charges levied against him in April 2011, releasing him from prison the same month. However, the prosecution in this case would get the judge's decision reversed. Not only that, they would also grant the DOJ's appeal to slap White with even harsher sentencing. White, at this point, would flee to Mexico to allegedly escape justice, according to the DOJ. But he would claim it was because he feared for his life after he had been tipped off that rogue FBI informants were plotting to kill him. On page 81 of his lengthy filing, he states, "In mid-April 2012, I received information that rogue FBI agents, which I now believe was a reference to the FBI operation involving CHS James Perazzo and Joshua Sutter, and FBI TFO Kelly Boaz, were planning to kill me, specifically by raiding my apartment and shooting me while claiming I was resisting arrest. I viewed this information as credible." White would go on to say that during his time in Mexico, he did not have access to the internet. Rather, the devices he used were primarily burner phones and devices that had no internet connectivity capabilities. He would be arrested in Mexico and sent back to the US to face trial. Upon his return, additional charges would be added onto him, specifically for sending threats over Facebook to those involved in the dubious American Front case, including Kelly Boaz. White had no prior connections to any American Front members, nor any prosecution involved in the case, except Kelly Boaz, as he had been investigated by him. White saying, "I had never heard of the American Front members involved in this case prior to my arrest and had no connection to them except that Kelly Boaz, an alleged victim, had investigated both of us." Given White's history with Overthrow.com, the juryman being a prime example, it certainly can be said that he did indeed send these threats, or at least is a prime suspect. However, the question needs to be asked, to what end? He had no direct connection to both the Cavalry Brigade nor the people involved in the American Front case, other than Boaz, and maybe Kreese, whom invited him to join, but he ended up ignoring the invitation email. Prior to this, according to his filing, after his release from prison in 2011, most of his attention was focused on some fairly nasty divorce proceedings between him and his wife, and recouping the damage done to his rental properties. Why would he risk putting himself into deeper shit than he already was? In his 2016 FOIA request, White would cite a couple of cases around 2008 and 2009, reported on by the Orlando Sentinel, where some bikers were in the talks of targeting both Obama and the newly elected Orange County Sheriff, along with another accusation of a biker offering $1,000 to anyone who would shoot a black man riding an ATV in rural Osceola County. White claims that Boaz is to blame for both of these cases. He says given this pattern of behavior, he believes that Boaz, or someone at his direction, is responsible for the threats sent under his name, although we only have his word in that regard. I want to briefly provide some speculation, a hypothesis as to why and how White's Facebook page may or may not have been compromised. I'm just yapping here. Waffling, as the British would say.
Skibbity toilet riz.
So take it as just that. This is assuming White's version of events are the correct interpretations. According to White, in 2010, he discovered his wife had embezzled $300,000 from his housing business and his Chapter 11 estate, among other crimes such as identity theft, all the while lying to him about it, only finding out after he had discovered his brokerage account had been emptied and closed. White stating she would go as far to go to the FBI and demand money she believed he had in offshore accounts during their divorce proceedings. According to White, the FBI had tried numerous times to entrap him during this period of release, one of which was confronting him directly not long after beginning his work with the American Free Press, the Barnes Review, and Iran's Fars news service, of which he later learned was owned by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, and putting out a bunch of fake news articles about him, primarily by the Roanoke Times. Here's where the speculation comes in. It's clear that White's wife hated him and wanted to destroy him financially, or worse, coupled with the FBI gunning for his ass because he tried to counter their counter-intel operation. My hypothesis is White's wife had worked with them in some capacity. If she had access to sensitive info such as White's bank account, what else could she have access to? Facebook credentials, perhaps? Maybe his wife encountered Boaz at some point, or vice versa, and they struck a deal. Hell, the way this reads, she could have just given him his password for all I know. However, White seems tech-savvy, as his skill set lies in web development. That does lend less credence to my hypothesis, as he likely has a good understanding of OPSEC. And at the same time, someone with a good understanding of OPSEC probably wouldn't send threats using their real name. Given who we're dealing with, it's tough to say. Although I think White is telling more truth than he isn't, he is willing to omit key details in claims that he's made, such as David Gletty being arrested in Alabama and the FBI assisting him out of it, coupled with his prior history with Overthrow.com and him doxing a juror he didn't like. I'd say a good amount of skepticism towards his claims is very warranted. On the other hand, we have Kelly Boaz, a cop with a less than stellar policing history, a man who's willing to pose as a bomb maker to entrap people, and coupled with the fact that he's willing to commit perjury in Deborah Plomin's case, I think it wouldn't be too unreasonable to consider White's allegations. But that's just me. You may think differently. And just as a side note, he exposed one of the largest and oldest neo-Nazi movements in America, the National Socialist Movement, founded back in 1974, as being not only infested with informants, but being co-founded by one as well. You can find the documents in White's filing, or you can read Ken Silva's article series about it, which is also pretty good. But that's a whole other adjacent rabbit hole.
Holy shit!
And this video is long enough, good God. White is still incarcerated at the time of writing, and is scheduled for release in 2037. And just as a parting fun fact, White's father, William David White, was former CIA. The years following White's FOIA request and his lengthy filing, Joshua and his cohorts would continue their infiltration into far-right politically dissident groups at the behest of the FBI. With this infiltration would also come a semi-unveiling of their operations, bringing with it a whole host of ethical questions and objections, even from the ones they were attempting to entrap. How much was the FBI willing to permit from their informants? Did they even know? If so, what is to be done? What can be done? The beginning of this unveiling would start with the infiltration of the Atomwaffen Division. The Atomwaffen Division, or the Nuclear Weapons Division, was a fascistically aligned accelerationist movement Like many of their contemporaries, they sought to hasten the collapse of modern society as we know it, believing it to be irredeemable. Through this collapse, their hope, just like many other dissidents, would leave the ruins ripe for the taking, their ideology being the one to prevail and take ultimate control. Atomwaffen's start came out of the now-defunct Iron March forums, a hub for many of the extreme far-right dissidents that exist today, announced in October of 2015 by a user going by the handle Roden, now known as Brandon Russell, saying, "This is a thread I should have made a long time ago. The Atomwaffen Division is a group comprised of many members, and has been many years in the making, at least 3. Our exact numbers are not to be talked about too publicly, but we are over 40 members strong, large concentration in Florida, various smaller chapters throughout the US, such as Chicago, Texas, New England, Boston, New York, Kentucky, Alabama, Ohio, Missouri, Oregon, Virginia, and a few others." The division heavily ascribed to James Mason's siege doctrine. His line of thought highlights a total war between those on the extreme far right and the system, seeking to sow any and all manner of chaos and anarchy. Quote, "At this point, anything which contributes to friction, chaos, and anarchy can only help us in the long run. Only through the total collapse of the system, in this case, the current standing American society, would create the conditions necessary to bring about order through his brand of Nazism." Quote, "Along this aspect, let us give some thought to what the next logical step might be toward opening the way to full revolutionary conflagration in the United States. From almost random shootings and immediate death or capture of the killers, to select consecutive assassinations by various movement people in different parts of the country simultaneously. We've already seen the killing of 2 vile system creeps in San Francisco by Dan White. If I were asked by anyone of my opinion on what to look for or hope for, next I would tell them a wave of killings or assassinations of system bureaucrats by roving gunmen who have their strategy well mapped out in advance and well nigh impossible to stop." Roden, or Russell, was soon joined by Devin Arthurs, not long after the group's initial founding. He and Russell had both met initially over TinyChat and had developed a friendship, their communications eventually moving to the Iron March forums. The two would become the first initial core members of Atomwaffen. As stated in his post, since at least 2012, the two had been discussing the group's formation along with engaging other interested parties throughout the world. Much of their activity from the official announcement in 2015 to the core leadership upheaval in 2017 would comprise of military-esque training and activism, as well as other in-group activities. Quote, "We are a very fanatical, ideological band of comrades who do both activism and militant training, hand-to-hand, arms training, and various other forms of training. As for activism, we spread awareness in the real world through unconventional means. Keyboard warriorism is nothing to do with what we are. We also do hunting, adventuring, and a group favorite is urban exploring. We have various specialists in the group, ranging from many occupations." Much of the division's early life would comprise of networking, recruiting, and getting the word out there, as they were essentially unknown. Much of the news and talks of their activity would be relegated to the Atomwaffen Division thread on the Iron March forums. The only instances of notable recognition would be through news articles, reporting on Nazi and anti-Semitic stickers, along with other Atomwaffen-branded posters and propaganda left at a few different college campuses. However, it wouldn't be too long when the name recognition of the Atomwaffen Division would skyrocket, albeit at their expense. In 2017, both Russell and Arthurs would move in together at an apartment in Tampa, Florida. Arthurs dropping out of high school in the process and having no gainful employment. According to the ProPublica article regarding the case, Arthurs' father, Alan Arthurs, believed both his son and Russell sold firearms across state lines in order to make ends meet. During this time is when the duo had linked up with another couple of Atomwaffen members, specifically Andrew Wunschik and Jeremy Himmelman. All four would use the Tampa-based apartment as their headquarters. However, on May 19th of 2017, some sort of altercation broke out between Wunschik, Himmelman, and Arthurs, which would unfortunately end in both men's murders by Arthurs' hand. Arthurs calling his father in the aftermath of the ordeal, and presumably his father would alert the authorities, and they would arrive on the scene and discover both bodies of the deceased men. A day later, they would arrest Arthurs after he had taken 3 hostages in a Tampa-based smoke shop, all the while proclaiming his stance against U.S. military occupation. Fortunately, no one would be harmed in this ordeal. Not long after Arthurs was placed under arrest, his roommate, Brandon Russell, would also be placed into police custody and questioned. Through their questioning, the police would gain more insight as to why Arthurs committed these crimes, along with some other discomforting discoveries. Arthur's father had told the authorities that on his son's initial call, he had committed the killings in order to foil the plot the division members were planning to carry out. However, he would also say both men had mocked him for his recent conversion to Islam and his support for ISIS. He would go on in his interview with detectives describing what he knew about the group's plans, which entailed using explosives in order to destroy vulnerable infrastructure, such as major power lines and nuclear reactors, along with talks of destroying government buildings and synagogues, and even offered to help authorities bring down other Atomwaffen members, going as far to request the interviewing officer to bring in an FBI agent to help comb through his laptop. Quote, "You think having your computer, an FBI agent as you requested, sit down and go over this stuff, you think then you would open some eyes?" Neitlinger asked. "Yeah, I definitely do," Arthur said. "I think it would open some eyes to a much bigger thing than what happened today, and I think I could basically save a lot of lives overall." The interviewing officer, seemingly persuaded by Arthur's plea, said he would pass the info along. According to the ProPublica article, Arthur's would get his wish. However, the agent would seemingly give little credence to his allegations. Russell had just returned home from his training with the Florida Army National Guard just after the killings had taken place, and was apprehended not long after his roommate. In his interview, he admitted to stockpiling explosives. Investigators finding a cache located in their single-car garage attached to the apartment, finding components for homemade pipe bombs, homemade fuses, sacks of explosive precursors including potassium chloride, red iron oxide, and potassium nitrate, along with mixtures of ammonium nitrate and nitromethane, radioactive materials, a couple of Geiger counters, and a cooler that contained hexylmethylene triperoxide diamine, a potent, highly volatile peroxide-based explosive. During his interview, however, Russell would claim the explosives were for a model rocket hobby. This being sufficient enough explanation for the local PD and the FBI agent whom had interviewed him released him from their custody, an officer even driving him back to the scene of the crime to retrieve his car. Using the opportunity, Russell bought a Smith & Wesson M&P 15 and a bolt-action rifle, loaded up some homemade body armor and 1,000 rounds of ammunition, and drove to the Florida Keys with another Atomwaffen member. There, he would be detained once again in Monroe County, the arresting officers discovering the equipment and being convinced they had just foiled a mass shooting. Arthur's telling his interviewing officer that through Russell's in as a recruit for the National Guard, he was able to provide him and other members with combat training, along with his access and ease of acquirement regarding the explosives. Quote, "He joined specifically for the knowledge and the training, and he wants to use that training against the government," Arthur said of Russell during his police interrogation. "These people joined the military specifically to get training, to get access to equipment. The ultimate goal," Arthur's continued, "was to become more equipped to kill people." Arthur's had also warned during his interview that Atomwaffen had attracted US military personnel, and they were looking to recruit more. The National Guard would launch their own investigation into Russell's activity during his employment. Although they would turn up some oddities, such as Atomwaffen's logo tattooed on his shoulder, a warning from his commanding officers regarding his harsh sentiment towards gay people, and a note that he seemed nervous receiving his military-issued gear, they would not find anything of great concern. Quote, "The investigation concluded that Russell had not sought to recruit other soldiers for Atomwaffen, and that he did not present consistent characteristics that would have led a reasonable person to suspect Russell held such radical beliefs." Investigators determined there had been no negligence in allowing Russell into the Guard or his continued presence in its ranks. In the end, Russell pled guilty on September 27th of 2017 to unlawful possession of a destructive device along with unlawful storage of explosive materials. He would serve a 5-year stint in prison and would be released in 2021. However, during his time in prison, he would meet Sarah Clendoniel, and the two would enter into a relationship. She had previously served time for armed robbery. The couple had planned an attack on the power grid in Baltimore, Maryland. They would both be arrested for conspiracy to damage an energy facility. Clendoniel was recently found guilty of this charge, and Russell was found not guilty of this conspiracy. As for Devin Arthurs, he was initially, in 2018, found to be mentally unfit for trial, but later, in June of 2022, he was deemed fit to stand. He would subsequently be found guilty on 2 counts of second-degree murder and 3 counts of kidnapping. He was sentenced to 45 years in prison, along with an additional 15 years probation upon release. Even though the original iteration of the Atomwaffen would become defunct with the arrest of both its founding members, its notoriety, along with other sects throughout the US, would continue to grow, following a series of crimes conducted by other Atomwaffen members. The first would be an assault by Vastilios Pistolis, a former Lance Corporal in the US Marine Corps. He would assault Emily Gorsinski, a counter-protester at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. A double murder carried out by then 17-year-old Nicholas Jampa, whom shot and killed his girlfriend's parents after learning of his extremist views and attempting to break off their relationship. And the case of Samuel Wormwood, whom attacked a fellow classmate, Blaze Bernstein, a gay Jewish 19-year-old at the University of Pennsylvania. The vacuum of power Arthurs and Russell left in their wake would come to be filled not long after. This new leadership would be responsible for the Atomwaffen Division's plunge into greater depravity, and its adoption of Satanism and esoteric manuscript, through the influence of Joshua Sutter and Gillian Hoy's Temple of Blood. Beginning with the two most relevant individuals in this story would be John Cameron Denton and Caleb J. Cole, the former known as Rape and the latter known as Kamari. Both Denton and Cole, just like their incarcerated compatriots, would be early recruits into the Atomwaffen Division, and both men would come to hold considerable sway within the inner workings of the group. According to both the collaborative ProPublica article, published in 2018, and the late Nate Thayer's article, published in 2019, not long after Russell's conviction, Denton would assume control of the group, and had a hand in nearly everything the group did and produced, from being an art director of sorts when it came to the style of propaganda they released, to assigning the required reading one had to do in order to join the Atomwaffen Division. Cole's role not being too dissimilar from Denton, as he too had a hand in its propaganda production, its recruitment, and its overall organization. Denton's leadership role would not be without contention, as the direction he sought to take the division in was far more sinister in nature than merely goading on societal collapse. This influence would manifest greatly within the books one was required to read in order to join the Atomwaffen Division during Denton's reign. One disgruntled Atomwaffen member blowing the whistle on this influence in a 27-page Google Doc, showcasing the division's newfound connection with Satanism. Quote, "A plague has befallen the movement yet again. This plague of ignorance, of compromise, of not following zero tolerance to a T. The last time this happened, 2 comrades were murdered in cold blood. I, along with others, refuse to let this happen again. We will purge the Noctulian scum from our ranks, and never again will this happen. So let us take a journey on how Atomwaffen Division and Satanism are connected, or rather more specifically, Rape, the de facto leader of Atomwaffen Division, and Satanism are connected." The members' first point of contention is the required reading of Iron Gates, a book published by Martinet Press, the in-house publishing arm of the Temple of Blood, run out of the same single-wide mobile home that Joshua and Gillian have been operating out of for nearly 2 decades up until that point. Quote, "Rape, among others in the AWD, started to promote Iron Gates, a book for all intents and purposes should be banned. It takes the reader on a journey of torture and gore porn. For example, first page, it describes how a baby is brutally murdered in front of his mother. This is required reading to join the AWD. Rape says verbatim, 'Iron Gates is a great read, and that's why I like it, and I find it very valuable. It's a great judge of character on who the man Rape is when he finds the brutal murder of a child to be a great read and very valuable.' Oddly, no one in the AWD has any issue with this, mostly because they view the book as just a meme, bro. I don't see how torture and gore is a joke, but hey, to each their own, I guess." Next, he would go on to talk about Liber 333, a book being passed around the AWD circles at the time. It described the inner workings of the Noctulians, among other aspects and beliefs practiced and held within the Temple of Blood. These Noctulians essentially acting as double agents, meant to infiltrate and subvert whatever movement they find themselves in. The movements they more likely will gravitate towards are those with sinister potential. The AWD member citing the second paragraph at the beginning of Liber 333, in the focus and direction of the Temple of Blood. Quote, "Second, the infiltration and manipulation of organizations and forms with sinister potential. Arianism, particularly the more religiously fanatical forms of it, such as Christian identity, are a good example. The manipulating Noctulian is to use these forms for their own presencing of the dark, as well as changing in subtle ways the followers of such forms to following a more sinister direction. For example, in identity, using knowledge of biblical doctrines and prophecies encouraging war, hardship, and system disruption, using the scriptures as guidance and proof of the message you are sending to adherents of the said form. Any form with a transhuman, system disruption, or satanic direction to it may be of use here. The key is finding a form that, in itself, is an aid to the dialect and empowering it further, causing a saturation of a causal energy." It would not stop there, however. The member also drew attention to some rather strange written works in the library section of Siege Culture, a since-defunct Atomwaffen Division ran website, under the spirituality section.
At first, you'd find what would be expected of such a group. But if you continued to scroll, you'd come upon more strange selections, such as the Devil's Notebook, Hostia, and the aforementioned Iron Gates, and another book of note, Bluebird. Another work published and distributed by Martinet Press. Just like Iron Gates, it too would put you on a list. Quoting an excerpt from Nate Thayer's 2019 article, Bluebird and Iron Gates are two 098 books that are required reading for Atomwaffen members. They depict scenes of a post-apocalyptic world where Aryan victors celebrate human suffering and engage in wanton child rape, torture, pedophilia, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. They are published and distributed by Gillian Scott Hoy, who runs the Satanic Martinet Press, and authored by her husband, Joshua Caleb Sutter. The disgruntled member would showcase another few excerpts from the book Hostia, as its teachings are not too dissimilar from what Liber 333 was preaching. First giving the examples of a Satanist concerned with experience, and using a political form for a specific purpose. What that form may be is irrelevant, both morally and politically. What matters is, quote, can it be used to provide experience of living in the limits of experience, and or aid the sinister dialectic of history. So long as the role of a Satanist is double agency, and its motives are to serve the satanic in some way, that is the only thing that matters. Should anyone criticize that is irrelevant. And if a Satanist does so, it is not a real Satanist, but a moralizing nerd lacking in insight and real satanic understanding.
The member continues on, showcasing other excerpts
that describe the infiltration of extreme political activist circles, in this case, extreme far-right political activism, and the purpose of doing so, describing what is to be done should a satanic novice desire to go further after reaching other set goals for itself, all in the service of gaining practical experience on the edge. Quote, a satanic novice, having developed a certain extent via ordeals such as grade rituals, the achievement of personal, physical goals, and the organizing and running of a satanic temple, desires to go further. For this, practical experience and some guidance is needed. Let us assume the novice is advised or chooses to use a political form to achieve this experience, and thus becomes involved with radical right-wing politics, because such people already possess an element or two of satanic spirit. The other sides in this form, and at this moment in history of this aeon representing the Nazarene disease in another guise. Thus, she takes part in direct political actions. This is both exciting and dangerous, given the prevailing sickness of this age. Gradually, she acquires practical experience on the edge, and hopefully some real tangible enemies, if she is performing right. These enemies probably hate her for her political views, and some of them may even harm her personally. The book giving some example roles one could take on in order to gain experience and test their satanic views to see if they desire to continue along the sinister way. These examples being traveling alone throughout the world, living frugally and testing their wherewithal throughout the process, becoming a professional burglar, specializing in the items one steals, extreme political activism, the goal being through your actions and fanaticism, you will be seen as a dangerous extremist by, quote, right-thinking people. Finally, joining the police force, living life at the sharp end, and being a servant of a higher authority. Once a choice is made, it is up to the individual to find a way to undertake the chosen role and go from there. After showcasing these books and their excerpts discussing satanic infiltration, the disgruntled member would ask the questions. Why would Rape, aka Denton, have these selections on his website, when, according to this doc, Denton decried Satanism and didn't allow Satanists into the Atomwaffen Division? Having this selection of books, and allowing an Eine Satanist by the name of Dante among their ranks, would greatly suggest otherwise. He would also go on to question why the supposed meme book, Iron Gates, among others, be allowed on a purportedly serious website representing a serious movement. The conclusion the disgruntled member would come to would be, quote, also, under the Siege Culture Library is Iron Gates, the supposed inside joke of Atomwaffen members leaking onto a supposed serious website makes me believe that either it's not a joke or it's not a serious website. The member continuing to unmask Denton's thinly veiled rebuke of the accusations of his satanic adherents. His first point of contention would be a photo posted on his Instagram far before he took the reins of the Atomwaffen Division, showcasing Mason's Siege, the Totenkopf and Waffen-SS sigils, as well as an out-of-frame Order of 9 Angles patch. When questioned where he had acquired this patch, Rape, through someone going by the pseudonym Black Israelite, would respond he had gotten it through his band. Quote, "What death metal band has that as their logo? Rape's band." What? Holy fuck, my guy. Bro, I am deceased. You really must be a group of retards if you can't see the problems of your de facto leader using satanic symbolism and fucking promoting their books and agreeing with their ideology. I'm fucking schlepped. He would then be blocked. He would spend the next 9 pages showcasing very damning evidence from Denton and others that they are in fact satanic adherents. First, linking to Denton's comment in the Iron March's O9A thread. The author pointing out that someone who is supposedly genuine O9A, mentioning in a reply that there are many initiates in most far-right subversive sectors. Quote, "More than you'd realize." Second, just having a conversation with the aforementioned Dante, or Dante Ascard, one of the leaders and admins of Siege Culture, having some general discussion about the O9A. Dante even recommending the books to look at should he be more interested in the subject. Further featuring posts made by the Siege Culture Twitter account. Discord messages saying the movement is a big waste of time and that he doesn't want to, quote, "save our people." The member saying that this message should have been enough to discredit Atomwaffen and to never take it seriously again, calling for Denton's execution in the process. Denton calling himself an apostle of Charles Manson. A respected member of the Atomwaffen Division leaving because of the satanic direction Denton was leading the group down, along with allowing someone by the name of Plato, a Strasserist, which is a strand of Nazism emphasizing a leftist anti-capitalist stance while retaining far-right ultranationalist attitudes among their ranks. Nearing the end, he would feature a couple of interesting photos, one of which has been lost in this archive, unfortunately, along with the website and YouTube channel of the author of Iron Gates. The page linked to would be the defunct Beast Barracks website, specifically to an article titled "A New Predatory Species Referred to as Noctulians." Quoting an excerpt from the end of the article, further, the temple distinguishes itself from the O9A with its unique vampire current, as hinted in its name, and promotes the evolution of its members into a new predatory species referred to as Noctulians. According to temple leadership, Temple of Blood has traditionally had a strong focus on harsh ordeals and enacting acts of infiltration, psychological operations, etc. Clearly, where many mainstream Nexions do much of their work in text and virtual space, the temple shuns these media of communication and focuses rather on taking physical, tangible action. Their YouTube channel having a small but strange catalog of videos.
What's going on, big guy?
The disgruntled member writing this ending paragraph, quote, "Given all this information, can you safely say that these men are National Socialists? Men you would go to war with? Leave your children with? Men who enjoy reading about babies being murdered? Men who are fond of Satanism and more than likely Satanist infiltrators? Men who allow Strasserists into their ranks? I don't consider these men as any more than complete scum who are subverting the movement towards that of total nuclear holocaust rather than saving our race so we can march towards total Aryan victory. Far too long has the movement been plagued by sociopathic losers who can't fathom what love is. Far too long have we allowed these scum into our ranks. No more. Zero tolerance is what we meet these scum with. So I urge you, my brothers, to remove these men from your ranks and march forward to total Aryan victory, with zero tolerance to those who don't." The member would return later to publish a final 10 pages of evidence against Denton and showcase the aftermath of his document,
talking about how he was red-pilled by various occultist figures and shifting Project Siege's direction accordingly, other occult literature, his fondness for Anton LaVey, and discussing his longtime interest in this realm of the occult. The disgruntled member finding more evidence of this dating back to 2014.
The final nail in this coffin would be the discovery of Denton's Google Plus account through his Metalpedia page. Quote, Noctulius. They made it obvious since the fucking start. We were just too stupid to realize it. Going on to spend the last 4 pages discussing the internal reaction to his document. Quote, now how does the AWD respond to these allegations? Do they refute them calmly? Message me personally so we can talk about this? Nah, they try to dox me, LEMMiNO. They would be seemingly unsuccessful in their attempts at doxing and intimidation. Ending off his document, showcasing the book collections of other AWD members, and refuting the accusation that he was the one whom ratted out, presumably Samuel Woodward's alleged membership within the AWD to the media. And a link to a conversation he had with Kamari, aka Caleb J. Cole. Unfortunately, this video seems to be lost to time, but listed in the archive video description, timestamps Kamari, or Cole, admitting to his satanic allegiance.
The next couple of years would prove to be the most tumultuous, the satanic influence causing a great deal of infighting, as showcased by the disgruntled members' Google Doc, but also scaring off new members, at least according to another Atomwaffen member interviewed by the Rolling Stone. Quote, as the occult and Mason gimmicks started to be pushed more and more, a lot of those new people dropped out because that was a bit much for even them to handle. Not long after Russell's arrest, talks of greater secrecy and security began. These talks would prove futile. The Atomwaffen Division had enjoyed the luxury of anonymity through obscurity for quite some time. However, the news of Blaze Bernstein's murder would do just the opposite, and propel them into the greater public eye. Due to the investigations initially conducted by the ADL, Denton's identity would be uncovered. And not long after that, the fruits of a collaborative investigation conducted by Ollie Winston, Jake Hanrahan of Popular Front, and A.C. Thompson of ProPublica would publish a lengthy article on the group. Thompson even confronting Denton at a black metal festival in Texas.
Come out here and talk to you about Atomwaffen. No comment.
Subsequently exposing them to a wider audience and revealing the identities of their leadership and its influences. This, as one would expect, wouldn't go over well for the members of the Atomwaffen Division. Denton would deploy the tactic of swatting. He and other Atomwaffen members specifically swatting A.C. Thompson and the headquarters of ProPublica. He would call the NYPD to their headquarters, claiming someone was armed with a pipe bomb, had taken a hostage, and had killed one other. Fortunately, no one was hurt during this response. 2 months after that event, he would do the same thing, but to Thompson's residence in California, claiming he had killed his wife. Once again, no one was hurt during this ordeal. The article on Justice.gov regarding Denton would detail his arrest and sentencing. Quote, a former leader of the Atomwaffen Division in Texas was sentenced today to 41 months in prison for his role in a conspiracy that conducted multiple swatting events targeting journalists, a Virginia university, a former U.S. cabinet member, a historic African-American church, an Islamic center in Arlington, Texas, and members of various minority groups and communities across the United States. Denton and his co-conspirators were believed to be connected to a total of 134 swatting incidents, Denton admitting to 2 of them to an undercover FBI agent, saying that he was indeed responsible for the ProPublica headquarters being swatted, along with A.C. Thompson's home address, saying that if law enforcement was to raid him, his arrest would serve as some sort of martyr status, and serve as precedents for copycats. The final nail in the coffin of the Atomwaffen Division would come in the form of a plan, dubbed Erste Sol, German for First Pillar. This operation was headed by Caleb Cole and another high-ranking member, Cameron Brandon Shea, otherwise known as Crocodile. According to the affidavit about Cole, because of the media coverage, namely because of the aforementioned ProPublica article, along with a great number of leaked chat logs on Discord, the members and leadership of Atomwaffen had uprooted much of their lives in order to go dark. Not long after, according to the FBI's confidential human source, Cole would announce to other Atomwaffen members that action must be taken against these reporters. Quote, the matter of these nosy reporters coming into our daily lives, where we work, where we live, where we go in our spare time. We must simply approach them with nothing but pure aggression. We cannot let them think they can that it's safe for them to come up to us and fuck with us. We cannot let them think they are safe in our very presence alone. Cole would continue to express his dismay towards the media and their coverage of Atomwaffen, leading up to their operation, even complaining to interviewing FBI agents in mid-2019, when he had been deported from Canada back to the US. These same sentiments being shared at their nuclear Congress meeting in Las Vegas, Nevada. The resentment would grow and reach a breaking point when Cole had been hit with an extreme risk protection order and all his firearms to be seized as a result. Many news outlets covering this event. It wouldn't be until November of 2019 when Operation Erste Sol would officially begin. Shay would create a group chat going under the same name, and subsequently invite his co-conspirators. Lazarus, 14ALG88, Azazel, Roman, Old Scratch, this username that Cole is accused of using, and one of the admins that had been listed on Siege Culture, Swiss Discipline. The aims of the operation was to intimidate and strike fear into the hearts of the journalists and others that had slighted them with their media coverage. Shay outlining the plan, saying its goal was to send a clear message that we have leverage over them. The goal, of course, is to erode the media/state's air of legitimacy by showing people that they have names and addresses, and hopefully embolden others to act as well. At Shay's direction, all the members in the chat chose their targets, and Cole, or Kim, had been developing the poster designs that would be used in their operation of intimidation. These would be the final results. After much deliberation and discussion of their operational security, and talks of plausible deniability in the event of their arrests, the plan would be put into motion, scheduled for January 25th of 2020. 3 days prior, the chat would be deleted, and the operation would go as planned, save for one of the members, specifically Azazel, or Taylor Ashley Parker DePep, along with another, leaving their poster at the incorrect address. All of this activity would be observed by law enforcement. In late February of 2020, it would be announced 5 members of the Atomwaffen Division would be arrested. Cameron Brandon Shay, Taylor Ashley Parker DePep, Johnny Roman Garza, and Caleb J. Cole would be detained for their roles in Operation Erste Sol. According to Justice.gov, his charges were 1 count of interfering with a federally protected activity because of religion, 3 counts of mailing threatening communications, and 1 count of conspiring with other Atomwaffen members to commit 3 offenses against the United States. Before his sentencing, however, Cole would bring his case to trial, his defense filing a motion to suppress the evidence gathered at his Texas residence. Their motion claiming the affidavits submitted had recklessly omitted information in their determination of the probable cause to search the premises, and as the document is written, failed to establish probable cause. Their first point of contention being the FBI's employment of a confidential informant, or CI. This CI, as the document points out, is a convicted felon, guilty of possession of a firearm with an obliterated serial number, and was in possession of an unregistered silencer, and has been working as an FBI informant for 16 years up until that point, in exchange for consideration of this felony status. Throughout his time as a professional informant, he has been paid over $140,000, the bulk of which came from his work coinciding with his investigative work into the Atomwaffen Division. The informant was the source of almost all the information that had implicated Cole, the document states. His defense counsel, believing there could be no other source, and because of only brief allusions towards the CI and no mentions of his work with the FBI, the magistrate whom signed the affidavit therefore was not able to make an independent determination about whether the facts supported probable cause for the search of Cole's residence. Therefore, as the defense argues, the fruits of evidence collected via the warrant should be suppressed. The second point of contention claims that Cole operated under this moniker in the Operation Erste Sol group chat. His defense claims this accusation is false, as the document gave no evidence supporting this claim and merely stated as such, providing no specific details as to how the CI identified Cole as that moniker. Although his defense does admit someone had committed a crime, they argue their client, Caleb J. Cole, was not the perpetrator, as the warrant claimed. His defense would go on arguing their case for 16 pages, citing other similar cases in regards to unlawful seizure of evidence, Fourth Amendment violations, and their argument of reckless omission by the prosecution. Their motion would ultimately be denied. Although the argument was sound in not attributing Cole with the moniker as stated, the counter was the case's totality of circumstances, the judge citing past actions by Cole such as threatening journalists and media outlets not long after reporting on the AWD, and for the reporting after he was served with an extreme risk protection order by the Seattle PD, and subsequently following through with their plan of intimidation. The argument against the accused reckless omission of the CI's involvement would be largely the same, saying, according to the affidavit as described above, local journalists identified defendant as a member of the Atomwaffen Division. In response, he made threatening comments directly to local media and their members, later receiving threatening communications from the Atomwaffen Division. This was all described in the affidavit and is not dependent on the informant's statements. The judge would go on saying the omission of the informant's employment and compensation throughout his 16-year period does not impugn his credibility, but rather would be a testament to it, saying that if he had been otherwise, the FBI would have terminated their relationship. Throughout the decades, every case that was thought to involve Joshua always obscured his identity in some way. Only through context clues, descriptions, and accusations could the reader glean insight as to what he had been involved in. However, in September of 2021, the public would be graced with a proverbial smoking gun in the release of Joshua's testimony at Caleb Cole's trial. Good afternoon. Could you tell the jury your name, please? Joshua Sutter. What city do you currently live in? Lexington. What state is that in? South Carolina. So you live in Lexington, South Carolina. That's correct. Are you married? Yes. What do you currently do for a living? Publishing. Have you also worked as an FBI informant? That's correct. Is it true that you have been involved in white supremacist groups in the past? That's correct. And which particular white supremacist groups have you been a member of? Several. But Aryan Nations, Church of the Sons of Yahweh. And over what time period were you a member of these groups? Late 90s up to 2003. What happened in your life in 2003? I was arrested in 2003. What charges were you arrested on? Possession of a Glock, 40 caliber with an obliterated serial number, and possession of a silencer unregistered to me personally. Were you convicted? I was. Did you serve time in jail? I did. How long? 2 years. During that time period, were you approached by the FBI? I was. Did they make a proposal to you? Yes. I was contacted through my lawyer soon after my arrest. Can you explain what the proposal was? According to my lawyer, after my release I would be. It was proposed that I would act in a deep cover capacity, and I was instructed to continue the relationships that I had in the right wing. Is that another way of saying that you worked as an informant? Correct. Did you agree to that? Yes, sir. Why did you agree to that? I found it an interesting proposal, and at that point, since I had talked amicably with the FBI, I no longer had any invested reason not to, really. Can you explain, just very generally, what types of things you did in your work as an informant for the FBI? Certainly. I've engaged in travel for person-to-person meetings with targeted individuals and target organizations, surveillance, use of surveillance equipment, things of those natures. Did you say you were released from prison in 2004? That's correct. And how long after did you start working as an informant? Immediately thereafter. And did you work more or less continuously as an informant since that time? That's correct. How much money have you been paid over the period of 2004 through the present? Over $100,000. Have you been charged with any other crime since that 2003 conviction? I have not. Are you familiar with an organization called Atomwaffen? I am. And how did you first come into contact with Atomwaffen? I was contacted by one of their members. And do you know who the member was that contacted you? Yes. Cameron Denton. How did he contact you? By social media, a message. And did you have an understanding of why they were interested in you? I had a reputation in the right wing and some ties to cultism, so my name was out there. I was approachable. And when you were contacted by Mr. Denton, did you report that to the FBI? I did. Did they give you any instructions on how you should respond? They did. What did they tell you to do? Well, I informed them that I had been contacted, and then soon thereafter, the events in Tampa occurred. And then I was formally invited to join. And I shot that to my handler, and then was told to join. Okay, and by your handler, that's the FBI agent you directly worked with. That's correct. So he instructed you that you should go ahead and join the Atomwaffen group. That's correct. Okay, how did you initially communicate with other members of the Atomwaffen group? The initial, I was vetted on a phone interview, and then thereafter utilizing Discord, which is an electronic communications means, and also Wire, which is an encrypted messaging service. And when members of Atomwaffen communicated over Discord or Wire, did they use their real names? No, sir. Did they use nicknames instead? Correct. Or an alias. Did you have an alias? Correct. What was your alias? Swiss Discipline. Did you develop an understanding of who the leaders of the group were through your participation in these communications? Yeah, that's correct. And what were the nicknames of the primary leaders of the group? Primary leaders were Rape and Kamari. And you mentioned Kamari. Did he send out regular communications to the Atomwaffen group? Yes, that's correct. Could you describe the nature of the communications he would send out, or what his role seemed to be in this? General nature of communications, propaganda development, recruitment, operational details. Joshua going on to describe a couple of hate camps, one in Washington and the other in California, saying that he and Cole were both present at these camps, along with answering questions about Cole moving from Washington State to Conroe, Texas, and his general reporting back to the FBI throughout the duration. And moving into 2019, do you remember being contacted by a member of the group named Crocodile? That's correct. Who is Crocodile? And by that I mean, what was his role in the organization? He was a recruiter. Did he make a proposal to you? That's correct. And what did he propose? He informed me that there was an operation called Operation Erste Sol. The gist of it was to send threatening communications to journalists, ADL personnel, civil rights types personnel, in retaliation for media coverage. How did he contact you? Wire. I'm showing you Exhibit 100. Is this the communication where Crocodile reached out to you? That's correct. And did you do anything to preserve this communication? That's correct. What did you do? Photocopied. Not photocopied. Photographed. And did that involve literally just using another phone to take a picture? Yes. Then what will you do with them after you captured them? Forward them to the FBI. So I think you mentioned that this is a chat just between you and Crocodile. That's correct. And were you then added to the chat group that was used to plan the operation? That's correct. I'm showing you Exhibit 101 now. Second page. Is this image the picture of you being added to the group chat? That's correct. And it says, another ranking gentleman added to the mix. Do you have any understanding of what that meant? At that point, I was a trusted upper echelon member. That was referring to you? Correct. The final part of Mr. Wilkinson's direct examination with Joshua would be discussing the propaganda posters that he had received, saying that Caleb J. Cole, or Kamari, was the one that gave them to him, and he subsequently gave them to the FBI. Cross-examination by Cole's defense would begin and take up the last 8.5 pages of Joshua's testimony, much of the questions being similar to Mr. Wilkinson's direct examination, some of which didn't seem all too relevant, such as asking if Joshua knew how old Denton and Cole were when he first met the two. However, some of the highlights of Mr. Black's questioning gave a little glimmer of what the FBI and Joshua's operational partnership was/has been like throughout the years. And during the course of your participation in the investigation into Atomwaffen, you provided all the information that you got about Atomwaffen to the FBI, correct? That's correct. And who was your supervising agent? My handler or your handler? Was that the entire time? The entire time you were working for the FBI and the Atomwaffen? There's been various special agents involved. Did you have a handler during the investigation into Atomwaffen, starting in 2017? Correct. Was it one person or more than one person? There were multiple people. Who were they? In the context of the Atomwaffen investigation specifically? Correct. Is my primary handler. I don't know his last name. Going on to ask about ideological discussions at the hate camps and if there had been talk of violent attacks taking place there, of which there were none, according to Joshua. Discussing the recordings that took place at Cole's residence in Conroe, Texas, he and another FBI agent bringing beer to the function, and finally, briefly discussing the over $100,000 that the FBI had paid Joshua. Apparently, he hadn't paid any taxes on it, I guess. You indicated that you've been paid over $100,000 working with the FBI, is that correct? Correct. Have you paid taxes on that? No. Did you tell the FBI that? No. You didn't tell the FBI that you weren't paying taxes? No. Did you tell them at some point prior to this trial, in the last few weeks perhaps? Correct. Sir, is that a yes? Correct. Is there any indication that you're likely to be charged with tax evasion for that? Objection! Relevance. Sustained. Nothing further, Your Honor. Redirect? No redirect, Your Honor. You can step down. Put your mask back on. Unfortunately, the testimony would end there. Today, it is unknown if Joshua is still working with the FBI, although it is believed he still is. Whatever they have him doing, if he's doing anything at all, is for them to know, and for us to find out. The only real online presence he has/had is believed to be the now defunct Agony's Point Press, and an active Substack account going by the same name. The About section reading, Agony's Point provides consistent content at the cutting edge of satanic theory, and is the sole vector of the aoral tradition of underground vampirism, no limits evil, unbridled predatory spirituality, beyond the pale upholding profound amorality in lockstep with interdimensional dark forces of incomprehensible evil, the undead. Join us on the grim path to the next level above human. All the posts on both accounts are what you'd expect. Although, in the archives of the Zitter account, there are a couple of interesting oddities. The first is this post, acknowledging 764. And this post, where we see an aged-up Joshua, and presumably David Mayat. More on him in a moment. The ethics in this story has been quite the elephant in the room. Those who claim to fight for justice doing seemingly just the opposite. On one hand, I can understand the FBI. They are on the forefront of every type of criminality, many extraordinarily dangerous. When your enemy acts with wanton disregard for the law, I can see why the FBI would have to work extra legally to get ahead of them, to bring them to justice. However, the deployment of such tactics is a fine line. Once it is crossed, and repeatedly so, can you really call yourselves the instruments of justice? I don't think you can. At that point, you're merely state-sanctioned criminals. Not only criminals, but as showcased by David Gleddy and William A. White, you are the very manufacturers of the terror you seek to destroy. Deploying entrapment campaigns so massive, it is the agents and informants that incite much of this terror. From Gleddy getting a bunch of skinheads to beat the shit out of a maintenance man, to him and his cohorts engaging in extremely dubious intelligence gathering, among other things, directed at people, in his words, are law-abiding citizens for the most part, just convinced in their beliefs. To hiring the likes of Kelly Boaz, an abusive cop taking an instrumental role in the horrifically botched case of Operation Primitive Affliction. Trying to entrap people through his role as a bomb maker, misidentifying Deborah Plowman, and subsequently losing a $30,000 lawsuit she brought against him and his department. Not only that, but allegedly being the director of William A. White's attempted assassination and threatening email debacle, both of which he alleges involved Joshua Sutter. Speaking of, there's the question of his influence. Putting aside the entrapments and alleged assassination attempts, the FBI funding Martin Press and subsequently its works of literature and branding has had far graver ramifications than merely driving a somewhat obscure apocalyptic neo-Nazi movement into a more sinister direction. But before that, I need to give a bit of context by pointing out a rather odd discovery I've made during the research phase of this video. A discovery that I haven't seen anyone else point out. Some of the more eagle-eyed of you may have noticed this near the beginning of the video, in the archives of AryanNations.org, just before Joshua's letter to Saddam Hussein. Here, this name, David Mayat. Mayat is believed to be the founder of the Order of Nine Angles. Although not confirmed, he is suspect number 1. Mind you, this was before Joshua's 2003 arrest. I don't know about you, but this is far too strange to be a coincidence. One of the assumptions that I had diving into this topic was Joshua was merely an informant. An eccentric one, but an informant. Only learning about the Angles later in life and subsequently creating a honeypot in the form of a Nexion. But this discovery completely shatters this notion, calling into question just how close Joshua was to genuine Eine, and if Mayat had a hand in directly influencing him. Granted, this was 20 plus years ago. A lot can change in that time. A lot has changed. For all I know, Joshua could have totally renounced any sort of genuine satanic beliefs in favor of being an informant for the FBI. However, given what we're dealing with here, an ideology built upon subversion, furthering the sinister dialectic of history, maybe this is all according to plan. Which leads me into my final point, his influence. There's no question that Martin Press and the Temple of Blood are honeypots directly funded by the FBI. Honeypots, by their nature, are supposed to capture or aid in the capture of whatever criminal element they're focusing on. But what happens when the honey is taken and used by the very criminals it's meant to capture? I'll tell you. It's used to fuel the same depravity of the likes of Angel Almeida, Kyle Spitz, and the many more dwelling within the depths of these online sextortion rings. According to the investigations conducted by Kian Tavaden, formerly known as Interzone Analysis, and a genuine O9A member he has contact with, they have found that the predators that dwell within these networks have been using things like the Nexion status, along with Martin Press branding, to goat children into producing CSAM of themselves. Before I showcase his account, you might be asking yourself, why should I believe him? Well, I'll tell you why. He's the only journalist in recent memory to conduct an interview with the aforementioned David Mayat. The way he gained this contact and was subsequently able to conduct this interview was going through a profiling process by some of his contacts within the O9A.
So they profiled me in a similar manner that FBI profilers would use on serial killers and sexual sadistic psychopaths. And given at the time I was dealing with academics from Cambridge and Oxford University, the Oxonians are also a reference to people from Oxfordshire, and they are all faculty at Oxford University, or were when they contacted me. As I said, they used sinister empathy masterfully to see who I'd respond to best as my main contact within their network, whom I am still in contact with. Now, she guided me rather than forced me to conclusions. Very Freudian and incestuous, but also making up for the fact that they knew I was involved in academia at the time, in international relations, and that I was not treated well there. My talents used to benefit the faculty and ostracize me from students without any protection from faculty or support. I was recovering from a divorce, as everyone who knows I work knew, and in a bad health situation, with very overt PTSD from my time overseas and in an extremely fragile state. I was overwhelmed with suicidal ideation from academia actually at the time, from the hate of the 95% female students who assumed I was a Nazi, and yeah, it was a shit time. So they got me a mother figure for me who guides me like an academic guides their prized postgraduate student, and allowed me to come to my own conclusions, would be gentle and not interfere, and then offer a little more and a little more, tailing my inadvertent initiation into the Order of Nine Ankles specifically for me. And as my better traits came forth, she would open up just a little more. And if this sounds sexual, well, that is because it is. It is fucking sexual. But it's sophisticated beyond anything people realize, especially my youthful Niner contacts. This is how the O&A operates on a person-to-person basis. Now, I went after Jake Hanrahan, another journalist who focused a lot on the O&A among other subjects, far more successful than me, very famous. If you're watching this, Jake Hanrahan, I hope we're cool. I'm not bringing you up for any reason other than for context. But without telling them I would go after him, as Jake Hanrahan had blocked me, accusing me of being a, quote, O&A propagandist posing as a journalist, end quote. I just did it since I enjoy starting shit sometimes, and unlike everyone else, I did not get banned for doing it. Stormfront had a whole conspiracy on this. Anyway, I naturally impressed my maternal figure being a good boy, and my Oxonian being a good soft money me dom, rewarded me for my courageous act by connecting me to David Myatt himself via various networks in the UK I can never talk about or disclose.
I don't know about you, but I view him as the most credible source regarding the O9A, barring an actual member, his or herself. Now on to his statement.
Once I realized the extent of how bad the other side of the O&A is, the co-opted Martinet Temple of Blood bullshit, not just co-opted for an entrapment scheme and money pot by the FBI to be used to create and entrap far-right terrorists in order to keep their government funding to their far-right counter-terrorism ring. Well, now it has been co-opted once again since 2018 to 2020 by pedophile networks who use Sutter's Martinet Press style brand to create fake Nexions, which is a term that essentially just means gate. And there are no Nexions, by the way. There are only collectives, at least in the actual ONA, as a Nexion is a literal temple, but it can also be a person. It can also be something far more esoteric. Read now, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. Anyway, so to essentially use the brand to create fake Nexions in order to recruit stupid teenage edgelord boys and expose them to child pornography, and then groom them to then use them as expendable opfer, and that's what you are, teenage boys who are doing this, you fucking edgelord retards. That's what you are. You're opfer cat paws by the older pedophiles to get to the underage girls. You are literally a fucking useful idiot to be expended. Then they've radicalized and created even more pedophiles from sexually undeveloped young men. But I have no mercy and no compassion for you, because I know what you've done, and yeah, you're old enough to die. Anyway, now this is not just to groom and use to create child pornography for the purposes of, quote, initiation. That's the way that they utilize it, to get into their Nexion. It is used to create sexualized child abuse of extreme self-harm of very young teenage and preteen girls. Worse than anything I've ever mentioned in my child abuse video, or ever really publicly. Now, 764, a pedophile network, an international one, who are involved in creating many of these fake ONA Nexions, mostly by slightly older pedophiles, to bait the edgy teenage girls into it, essentially by using Martinet, TOB, TOBV, Agnes Point Press, etc. material to justify and create a endless supply of new child porn videos of girls, usually between the age of around 11 to 14 years old. And then they hack, dox, threaten, drag them into Telegram groups of 1,000 people, watching you at 12, masturbating on camera, and 1,000 people laughing at you, a child, a little girl, and your body, telling you to kill yourself, doxing your address, and if you don't kill yourself on camera, now your family are going to get all the fucking videos. Now, I've seen this is real. I've bore witness. And watch 11-year-olds slitting their wrists vertically open on stream to pedophiles, fountaining blood so much the entire bathroom floor is drenched. I'm talking about a fucking child. But people forget, I never wanted to be a Niner. I was actually dragged into this. And then via realizing what was happening with these pedophile networks and how no one in the media gave a fuck enough to do anything about this, and because these girls are, quote, neo-Nazis, so I guess 11-year-old deserves to die slowly, painfully, and horribly to masturbating pedophiles on live streams so that their parents will never see, essentially, finding their daughter dead and never realizing why or how giving them access to a smart device opened them up to be groomed, sexually radicalized, abused, sexualized, made into child porn videos, and then self-harm, and then, you know, actually killed them, murdered by cowards who were too pussy to actually kill someone in real life. So they target children, usually from Eastern European backgrounds, and manipulate them with the help of 1,000 other sexually inadequate types to feel powerful. Fucking pieces of shit. So I can no longer stay objective, and I have to thank a young man for networking me into seeing just how bad this situation is, even if it was done for purely selfish reasons, which I know it was not. You pry into my personal life too much, but I'm sorry, you are essentially a good person. So if anyone follows me on Twitter, you'll see the absolute chaos and war I have been fighting essentially constantly against pedophile and edgelord niners. Not because I want to, but because I am morally fucking obligated to. This is what this video is truly about and why I care about the ONA. And what it actually is, without mystification, and to show the massive discrepancy between the Order of Nine Angles collectives and individuals I associated or associate with, and the co-opted brand name, recognized networks of pedophiles and edgelord idiots internationally that have no subtlety, no actual knowledge, and no purpose other than being assets to fuel the intelligence services, security services, counter-terrorism units, and help push more totalitarian laws through Parliament in the case of Australia and the UK, and through Congress in America, and to fuel the creation of a constant stream of child pornography, child ritual abuse, sexualization of minors, abuse of children, violent sexual abuse, violent self-harm, for pedophile and pedophile networks. So from the sophistication of sinister empathy and on a person-to-person basis that I mentioned before at the start of this video, to you want to be part of our Nexion, you need to incise 333 into your cunt. Literally.
If what Kian is saying is to be believed, which I do, then it is an ironic and cruel twist of fate. In the FBI's bid to fight off terror, they've inadvertently fueled one of the largest, if not the largest, predator networks to exist today.